Namaste and greetings. I, Reetlat, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today marks the 9th day of Young Women Leaders in Public Policy Fellowship, an online national winter school program, a 2-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship. This program is organized by IMPRI, Gender Impact Studies Center, and would be chaired by Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting Distinguished Professor IMPRI. This program has an excellent panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise for the duration of this program. We are honored to have a distinguished panel of experts joining us for day 9, which includes Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji, retired Professor International Relations, Javadpur University, Kolkata, and Dr. Nivedita P. Haran ji, former Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Kerala, visiting Distinguished Fellow IMPRI. This will be followed with the presentations from the participant teams. The panel of convener comprises of Dr. Arjun Kumar ji, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, Professor Gomadi Sridevi ji, and Advocate Dr. Shalonigam ji. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into fostering the development of young women leaders in public policy, while helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this online course for impactful policy research and action. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping announcements once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. And lastly, refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Now, without any further ado, let's start our program. I'm delighted to call upon Professor Vibhuti Patel ji to deliver the opening chair remarks. We welcome you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Reetlat, and welcome, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya. On this 9th day, I think, first of all, I would like to express my thanks to the IMPRI team, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Shalonigam, Ms. Priyanka, Shweta Shankar, and also greet Dr. Nivedita Haran and Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya and esteemed participants. The theme for this year's International Women's Day, which will be just 5 days from now, it is inspire inclusion, invest in women, accelerate progress for fostering inclusive and equitable societies through economic empowerment of women and girls, and also but what we see that we have a long way to go. And this course, which is aimed at inculcating leadership qualities among women in all areas of governance and politics. I think it started with the first day one where Ms. Amarjit Kaur, she spoke about women's participation in decision-making from her entry point of grassroots organization, both in the women's rights movements and in the trade union. The day 2, we discussed the question of a whole development trajectory of our country over the last 75 years and the challenges that we faced in the realm of economy, social organizations, and political parties and political structures. We had 2 presentations, one by me, another one by Ms. Urvashi Prasad, who had worked both in the NGOs and currently she's associated with the Niti Aayog. The 3, we had a global understanding, global perspective on 4 phases of feminism by Professor Roxana Marinescu from Romania. And my presentation was on the development initiatives by the state through planned processes and also because of the special schemes and programs and gender responsive budgeting that the state has done. Day 4 highlighted the major concerns of women in administration and in the governance structure, where Dr. Purnima Chauhan spoke about Pandora's box, policy challenges in empowering young women leaders. And she shared her personal experiences of being a principal secretary in Himachal Pradesh, so working at a subnational level. And she also shared some of the best practices which she had observed and experienced while in a study tour of several Scandinavian countries. Dr. Simi Mehta uh, enhance the capacity of the participants by explaining them the nitty-gritty and the nuances and the processes of research writing, where she, from idea to publication, the whole journey she explained. Day 5 focused on women in the corporate world, where Professor Miss Medavini Namjoshi, who is with the Ambuja Cements in CSR department, she discussed the leading with purpose and making a difference by the young women officers in the CSR realm. We also had a presentation from Miss Sangeeta Rege, who highlighted the role that women leaders have played in the health sector, both in the public health and also in the private sector. Day 6 was focusing on big data-driven landscape and how to navigate metadata and the data deluge in India by Dr. Soumyadeep Chattopadhyay and Advocate Audrey DeMello, Director of Majlis. She also discussed the experiences of last 40 years of intervention in terms of support to survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, trafficking, and what kind of implementation hassles that they face, even when there are very well-designed laws as well as schemes supported by funding. Day 7 was about the women in management, and Professor Rokeya Joshi from SP Jain Institute of Development and Research, she spoke about the leadership lessons for young women in public policy. And we also had Anna Usha Abraham, who retired as a president of Mukund Iron's company. She spoke about the importance of networking and the importance of personal development, assertiveness training, and multitasking, which the young women leaders in the corporate world have to do. And we also had a young resource person, Mr. Yash Agarwal, who talked about the current prospects and problems in the career for the young women leaders in public policy. And he also shared his first-hand personal experience. Day 8 of the previous session was about where Dr. Albertina, she discussed the advancing inclusivity in society led by women, and she discussed her experience as a practicing lawyer and also a feminist activist in Goa, and various types of tactics and strategies and challenges which her organization, she's the founder of Bailan Josad, had faced. Dr. Seema Kulkarni, who is a founder of Maqam Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch, she focused on gender and climate change based on her first-hand experience of working with women farmers and agricultural workers in 18 states of India. We also had a presentation by Professor Tulsi Jaikumar on entrepreneurial journey and navigating challenges and opportunities for young women. And the Anjali and we also had discussion on how to create an enabling environment for the public action by also another speaker, Ms. Anjali Bawa. She spoke about her challenges in mentoring young women into the area of enterprise development. And today we are going to have a very important session on diplomacy, foreign policy. We all know that at one level we are talking about future is female, but women in diplomacy are still underrepresented. Women are still underrepresented in foreign policy and public policy, particularly at the senior positions. And this is despite proliferation of networks advocating for women across sectors, purported support by numerous governments for increasing women's representation in negotiation, whether they are peace negotiations or free trade negotiations or negotiations for people-to-people interaction and collaborations. And even the research which illustrates that benefits where women are included in negotiations all benefit the nation states, the communities, and women. So we are going to, today is going to be a very interesting session where we have a senior diplomat who is going to share her experiences and learnings on women in diplomacy and foreign policy. Over to you, Preeti.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for setting such a positive tone for our discussion today and for providing us with such a comprehensive overview of the course. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, it is my honor and privilege to invite Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji to deliver a keynote address on diplomacy, foreign policy, and leadership for young women in public policy. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Reet. In fact, without further ado, may I have the PPT up? Yes, thank you. Well, today's discussion, but before I begin, let me first, in fact, thank and congratulate actually IMPRI and the people who are involved, especially the idea, of course, is Professor Vibhuti Patel's. And so, well, thanking her and congratulating her and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Priyanka Negi, Reet, who has done such a good job, really in conducting such a beneficial workshop for young leaders in, or young women leaders in public policy. I have listened to some of the videos later, and in fact, I have found them to be educative as well as very contextual. Today, in fact, as Dr. Patel said, I'm going to speak on women's leadership in diplomacy and foreign policy, a topic which can actually take up a book. And I am an academic, so basically, I mean, one does talk a lot, but I am going to focus basically on the significance of women in diplomacy, which will lead me to contextualize it theoretically. A little bit of theory, of course, is involved here. And I'll briefly dwell on the international context because, of course, foreign policy is international relations. Next slide, please. Women in diplomacy, well, has become a much discussed topic ever since the UN General Assembly in a 76th session declared 24th June as the International Day of Women in Diplomacy, and basically inviting all UN member states, NGOs, academic institutions, associations of young diplomats where they exist, to basically observe the day appropriately through education and basically public or rather awareness raising, public policy awareness raising. Next slide. Now, historically, this has been basically, this area of women in diplomacy has been there for a very long time, but it's been a men's preserve for the large part. And what is interesting is that from the 16th century, as we can see in the slide, women have been involved in diplomacy in a very formal manner. And it's not just basically informally people have been asked to kind of mediate, but they have been. 1507, Ferdinand of Aragon, that is of Spain, accredited his daughter, Catherine of Aragon. Catherine, as you know, of course, was also married, I mean, to Henry the Eighth, his first wife. So she was accredited formally as a Spanish ambassador to England. In 1529, there's the Treaty of Cambrai, which is also known as the Ladies' Peace. And this was negotiated actually by, and not only negotiated, but drafted by Louise of Savoy, who happened to be the mother of King Francis of France, and Margaret of Austria, who was the aunt of Emperor Charles V on behalf of the respective countries. Later in that century, Madame de la Haye Patel was also appointed French ambassador to Venice, and this was an accredited post. Later on in the early 17th century, Madame Marchal de Guebria was sent as a French ambassador to Poland. Now, also important is that basically in 1670, the Duchess of Orleans, who was the sister of the British king at that point of time, negotiated the secret Anglo-French Treaty of Dover because King Louis XIV asked her to do so. Later on, France basically discontinued the service, and again it was Spain, which really was the first country to go back to appointing women as ambassadors, when in fact Isabel de Zuluet was appointed as Chancellor of the Spanish legation in Panama in 1933. And by the early 20th century, by this time, in fact, 13 countries, including Turkey and Nicaragua, had admitted women into their diplomatic and consular services. However, what is significant is the invisibility of these women in the diplomatic histories of their countries or internationally. So basically an invisibilization of the important role that women often played historically in negotiating, basically being diplomats. Next slide, please. And if we take India, all right, her story remains the same, because here also we find invisibility of women diplomats, and they were also accredited diplomats. Okay, now basically, women actually broke the barrier of joining the foreign service in 1948-49, and one would assume that having started so early, by now, in fact, the glass ceilings would have been broken, but well, we'd be mistaken. So here again, you find the same story of invisibilization. Take, for instance, Vijayalakshmi Pandit, the first woman to serve as ambassador to the Soviet Union in 1947, followed by ambassadorships to the United States and to the United Kingdom. And of course, she was also appointed as the first woman president of the UNGA. Now, who knows that? Even General Assembly. And basically, she served multiple stints as leader of the Indian legation to the UN. Today, in fact, few know of her diplomatic career, which those who know often dismiss as, oh, she was just Prime Minister Nehru's sister, without recognizing the fact that she did work and did do very important work in foreign policy when new democratic India was basically being born. And she was not the only one. There was Hansa Mehta, who played a key role in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There was also Begum Sharifa Hamid Ali, who has almost disappeared from the diplomatic archives, but she was the founding member of the UN Commission on the Status of Women in 1947. Lakshmi Menon, the member of the alternative Indian delegation to the UN, head of the UN section of the status of women and children between 1949 and 1950. She was also deputy minister in the Ministry of External Affairs in 1952. And then we have Renuka Roy, the Indian representative to the UNGA in 1949. All these women were representing the newly independent India in different capacities at the newly founded World Assembly. So much so that, in fact, some newspapers in the United States at the time, commented on India's commitment to women's representation. But today, they have been relegated to near invisibility in the deep archives of diplomatic history. Next slide, please. Today, we see, of course, an increasing number of women in the Indian Foreign Service. But let me tell the story of C.B. Muthamma, who was the first woman IFS officer in 1949. Well, at the time, there was a marriage bar only for women, which was lifted in 1973. So, of course, marriage was a no-no, but that is not that important as the fact that basically she was bypassed for promotions despite having a stellar service record. All this forced Muthamma to take her employer to the Supreme Court in 1979, where in fact Justice Krishna Iyer called out the misogynistic service rules of the Ministry of External Affairs, calling it masculine hubris, and said that this amounted to suppression of women officers, and this actually laid the ground for course correction. Now, what is important is it took 30 years. She joined in 1949. She basically sued in 1979, okay, for things to begin to change. Now, in the US, the story was still the same. In fact, it still doesn't have a woman president. But let me talk about Alison Palmer, a mid-level career officer in the State Department, tired of the glass ceiling on promotions for women officers, first, in fact, sued in 1969. She won the case and then, in fact, went in for a class action suit in 1979, brought the Department of State to book. This was settled after a very long time in 1990. In Palmer versus Baker, the plaintiff claimed widespread discrimination against women in hiring as well as in promotions. And in fact, in basically the, well, she won the case. And the court ruled that basically women are discriminated against in the United States in hiring and in promotion. But it also said that one of the reasons that they are discriminated is because they're never given the opportunity to work in responsible positions. Basically, they're not promoted. And that is why, in fact, they are found not to be fit. But then they're not given the promotion. So how can they gather the experiences necessary for promotion? Next slide, please. Now, this is relevant to India. Out of 28 Indian ambassadors to the US since 1947, only 4 have been women. The first, of course, was Vijayalakshmi Pandit. And in fact, the 3 after that are in the 21st century. US does not fare much better. The 4 of the 33 US ambassadors to India have been women. But so far as other data is concerned, you find that there is an increase in foreign service members. And in fact, 33% of US ambassadors are women. Okay, 31% of senior State Department positions are held by women. So in that way, basically, it is better. But in fact, I'll give other data which is out there, but I'll relate it later. Today, in fact, only 2021, basically only 19 women served as heads of mission. 19 ambassadors out of, well, 176. And basically, women who are IFS officers and 815 IFS officers in 2021 were basically women. And I'll give this data again later. Now, here one must remember that there is no one glass ceiling, but a pernicious sustainability of patriarchy, with gender discrimination being not so overt now, but certainly nuanced. Otherwise, how does one account for the fact that although women were admitted into the foreign service as early as 1948-49, it took over half a century for a woman foreign secretary to be appointed. Chokila Iyer was the first foreign secretary, and there were a lot of, well, rumors about basically why she was appointed, and she served for only a small, very, very short period. Since then, there have been only 2 more. So basically 3 out of 33 foreign secretary appointees have been women. In 2020, the strength of the IFS was 815, with 176 women officers, as you can see, with only 19 of them serving as heads of Indian missions to various countries, raising the question of why women diplomats occupy a disproportionately small number of the highest offices. Now, having made my point about subtle glass ceilings, still continuing for women in diplomacy, for future generations to break, hopefully, let me speak on a more positive note about the strides made by and for women. And in this, basically, the leadership of the UN, which already mentioned, 24th June is the day, International Day for Women in Diplomacy. And this is a recognition of the gender awareness in foreign policy. But basically, let me talk about, next slide, please, the origins of basically of this decision in the 76th General Assembly. Now, of course, first the 3 world conferences, Mexico City, Copenhagen, Nairobi. Then you have the 1979 CEDAW, which basically talked about, and in fact, well, broke the ceiling about elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which of course also includes the foreign service. the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995 provided the Beijing Declaration and platform for action. Gender equality also found its place in the MDG, the Millennium Development Goals, in goal number 3, and in the SDG in goal number 5. And most important, of course, is the resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, which brings us close to today's topic on foreign policy and diplomacy. 9 further resolutions on gender-related issues followed, including resolution 2467, which was brought by Germany in 2019. And this was basically on sexual violence in conflicts. Since 2005, 100 states have adopted national action plans based on UNSC Resolution 1325. Notably, in fact, the European Union has basically underlined the importance of gender equality in its development policy, which is a part of external foreign policy. And in 2020, in fact, the EU published the Gender Action Plan number 3, that is Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment in External Action, 2021-2025. In fact, a succession of states, and may I have the next slide, please, basically have introduced what is called today feminist foreign policy. In fact, I'm talking about all this because this is important for anybody aspiring to be a foreign service officer or to serve in external affairs or to network civil society organizations, network in development policies abroad or in India. They should know about the developments which have been happening. And here, in fact, this FFP for feminist foreign policy was introduced first by Sweden, followed by Canada, France, and there's Luxembourg, and I have missed out Mexico, actually, which was in 2020, Spain, Libya, Germany. And you find that in 2021, the 7 governments committed to FFP launched the Global Partner Network for Feminist Foreign Policy, together with 12 civil society organizations, which aims to basically promote policy innovation, shared learning processes, and converge policy by developing a common framework for FFP and criteria for operationalization. Already Professor Patel has talked about networking and the importance of networking. So here you find women's networks in foreign policy actually coming up, and this is of course a global network. Now, feminist foreign policy is in fact a recent phenomena, and in fact it represents a new kind of branding. But for the first time, what is important is that a specific policy area has been officially designated by governments as feminist. And this is significant because well, as mentioned, this area was strongly male-dominated and therefore privileged the perspectives, ideas, and experience of men, and failed to take perspectives, gender-specific perspectives into account, and therefore reproduce gender inequality. Now, it is assumed that in an asymmetrical gender order, which is prevalent worldwide, men and women's experiences diverge, and the two genders experience power structures differently. For instance, women and men are affected differently by poverty, conflict, and war, and their contributions to development and peace also diverge. There are both normative and pragmatic arguments for gender equality. On the one hand, the goal of gender equality can be basically justified intrinsically as a value in its own right. And in this sense, it can be seen as a matter of human rights and anti-discrimination. But on the other hand, research into the effects of gender equality generates extrinsic arguments for equal participation of women, with empirical evidence showing that gender equality contributes positively to peace and prosperity. That is, it benefits the entire society and the international system. Now, this is the basis for the demand for equal participation of women in foreign policy in the form of a feminist foreign policy, which underlines the intention to go beyond just equality of the sexes. That is not just to be reformist within existing structures, but structurally transformative and even disruptive. However, it should be mentioned that so far there is no consensus about what is this transformative change that will happen, since feminism is itself not monolithic, but has many different interpretations and strands based on the contributions of, well, different groups like Black women, women from the Global South, trans persons, LGBTQIA, etc. So basically, you have different, and there is no consensus, not yet. Now, without going into the background of various feminist understandings, because this is beyond the scope of this paper, and as I said, it can take a book to write about all this, let me mention the debate about having a national feminist foreign policy and raise a series of questions. Does the concept and implementation of FFP go beyond gender mainstreaming? What is the substance behind the rhetoric of structural transformation? What exactly is the emancipatory moment? And most important, what is actually feminist about foreign policy? That is, what is the fundamental thrust of the feminist factor in foreign policy? Next slide, please. Now, here let me give basically a definition of the International Center for Research on Women, which is out there, the policy of a state that defines its interactions with other states as well as movements and other non-state actors in a manner that prioritizes peace, gender equality, and environmental integrity, enshrines the human rights of all, seeks to disrupt colonial, racist, patriarchal, and male-dominated power structures, and allocates significant resources, including research, to achieve that vision. That is feminist policy. Others, in fact, basically have talked about it, defined it as having a core values like intersectionality, empathetic reflexivity, active peace commitment. But at a lower level of abstraction, one can glean out that a feminist perspective in FFP argues for demilitarization and for prioritization of peace over security, inclusion over exclusion, cooperation over domination. Next slide, please. Now, at this point, I'd like to raise, in fact, a few pertinent issues regarding FFP. Firstly, it's on the left side. Does implementation of FFP require more women diplomats? There's the issue of gap between rhetoric and practice. There's a tension between FFP and other policy issues. And of course, the question how to accommodate the heterogeneous demands of different feminist perspectives, which I had mentioned earlier. Now, to take up the first issue, in Europe, in most cases, the ministries that have introduced feminist foreign policy and development policies have been headed by women. But that does not mean that feminist goals will be advanced wherever women lead. Although theoretically, at least, it is assumed that women will look at women's issues during conflict and war, forced migration, refugee outflows, or in terms of development, through a women's lens and not through the gender-neutral patriarchal lens. But here the tension with the second and third issues that I mentioned come into play. A diplomat, whether male or female, represents a state and has the nation's interests in mind. So therefore, this leads to a gap between theory and practice. Now, let me explain this by just citing one case. The case of Sweden, which in fact took the lead in FFP. Now, here, basically, it has a feminist foreign policy, and basically it also has an export control law that states that its arms export policy will be guided by the democratic status of a country. But still, Sweden, in fact, continues to supply arms to regimes that violate human rights and women's rights. For instance, Saudi Arabia, which passes on, and it knows very well, basically, that it passes on its arms to Yemen. Also, one can question whether having more women in the armed forces, having a female defense minister, as well as a woman external affairs minister or a woman finance minister is compatible with a feminist foreign policy if military spending and arms exports are increasing. Okay. Further, how does one look at phenomena like, and I mentioned it here, strategic competition, geopolitical rivalry, trade wars through a feminist lens? And these are all very, very pertinent in the international scenario today. And finally, since feminism and feminist theory has been around for much longer than feminist foreign policy, there are diverging feminist approaches to the same problem. For example, and I've given one here, the Marxist-Leninist approach to equality of the sexes presupposes the abolition of capitalism, while queer feminist positions seek to overcome heteronormativity and gender binary as the social ordering principles for basically society. Now, despite all these differences, however, in feminism as a discipline, IR scholars agree that gender is an ideological and social construct constituted by inequalities in power relations and social structures, and has significant implications for the respective experiences of men and women, especially in the global economy. Next slide, please. Global economy, high politics, and war. In fact, next slide, please. The next slide shows the Gaza war. So in fact, I would like that to be on. Reith. Okay, basically it shows that this is of course scenes from Gaza. And what you see, of course, are the women and the children. In fact, in modern wars, they say that women and children make up 80 to 90% of civilian deaths. And systemic rape has been a weapon of war in various wars from Bosnia-Herzegovina, DRC, Sudan. Now, seeing war through the eyes of a woman, according to feminist theories, can change the very nature of what constitutes the boundaries of foreign policy, shifting the focus from the causes and costs of interstate war to the drastic consequences individuals suffer due to militarization and oppression. Next slide, please. To go a bit further into feminist IR theory, realism is preoccupied with a type of power that facilitates domination over others. An idea that feminist theorists argue is a masculine perspective that promotes militarism and aggression. Hannah Arendt, she's not a professed feminist IR scholar, but she contends that that power is the ability to act in concert with others. That is, there is a distinction between power over and power with, which is a whole new perspective on power as a collaborative effort rather than an ability to dominate. Further, feminist IR scholars debunk the realist idea of security as provided by the state, arguing that the state, as currently conceived, and the militarism that it inspires, does not provide security for individuals, for individual civilians. It in fact provides insecurity for individuals. The negative impact of war on women or the economic hardships that follow, especially for women, debunk the myth that the state provides adequate security for civilians. This opens up space for multifaceted definition of security that includes the diminution of all forms of physical, structural, and ecological violence. So a feminist foreign policy based on feminist perspectives has the potential to transform the practice of foreign policy. And in the contemporary world, cooperation is needed more than domination if mankind and society is to survive. Now, according to UN documents, when women serve in cabinets and parliaments, they pass laws and policies that are better for ordinary people, the environment and social cohesion. But I'm not going into basically the debates because there are many debates about this, that women are mothers and therefore they have a soft approach. But this has been critiqued by other IR scholars who, and in fact, examples have been given. The women in Abu Ghraib, for instance, they certainly did not act like mothers or anything like that. So, so it's this has been critiqued that, well, they're soft. They need not necessarily be soft, but I'm not going to that criticism at all. Instead, in fact, let me briefly, and next slide, please, talk about some role models. All right, and and prime ministers and basically US secretaries of state who are the role models. Here, in fact, what I'm trying to say is that women who become prime ministers or presidents in countries where they are the heads of government, basically, they are also obviously the leaders in foreign policy. They head cabinets and therefore deal directly with foreign policy and diplomacy, including trade deals, war and peace, refugee flows, etc. Now, in the subcontinents, we have had very strong prime ministers. Sirimavo Vandanayake, Indira Gandhi. We also have Benazir Bhutto, and you have, of course, Sheikh Hasina and Zia, also Begum Zia. Now, basically, they also all of them served as defense ministers. So what you find is, in all cases, you find that as prime ministers, they took steps which are in the national interest. And so, of course, there's a clash sometimes between what we think of as feminist lens and feminist ideals, because they were prime ministers in their own right. They took steps in the national interest. And in the case of Indira Gandhi, along with other prime ministers like Prime Minister Golda Meir and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, they were not reluctant to go to war if circumstances demanded it. But I wish to, in fact, focus more on US secretaries of state, who, of course, also have their own national interests in mind. But at the same time, they have contributed a lot to basically FFP. And surprisingly, there have been 71 secretaries of states in the United States. Next slide, please. But only 3 of these have been women. Albright, Condoleezza Rice, and Hillary Clinton. Madeleine Albright basically believed that women should help each other, especially if they were in the position to do so. And let me quote her: "I believe that societies are better when women are politically and economically empowered." Now, what did she do actually? I mean, this is something that I want to point out, but this was not a Secretary of State, but when she was US ambassador to the UN, she worked with 6 other women representatives. She called it the G7. In fact, she didn't mean G7, she meant Girl 7. Okay, these were all women. And in fact, this was during the Bosnian crisis, all right, as such, what was happening out there. They worked together to set up a war crimes tribunal in the Balkans, where, in fact, many Bosnian women had been raped. In fact, they worked together to get 2 women judges to serve in the tribunal, which ultimately declared rape as a weapon of war. Condoleezza Rice contribution is what she termed as transformational diplomacy, a shift from how and where diplomacy is practiced. That is, diplomats should be more involved in transforming lives, individual lives, as well as the world, and not just on reporting on the actions of the government. But it was Secretary Clinton who took women's diplomacy to a new height. Her engagement with diplomacy goes back actually to when she was First Lady, and she attended the Beijing conference in 1995 and rebuked the Chinese government for denying women's autonomy, saying human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. She has been credited for bringing women to the center of US foreign policy, by recognizing and institutionalizing the link between women's status and attainment of national security objectives. She established what is called today the Hillary Doctrine, wherein she set out basically principles of a feminist foreign policy, including condemnation of rape as a weapon of war, and calls to end basically gender discrimination. And this, in fact, facilitated the passage of Resolution 1325, recognizing the critical role of women in peace and war. As Secretary of State, she elevated the State Department's Office of Global Women's Issues so that it would report directly to her and increase its budget, and also launched the quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Report to incorporate women into the policy proposals of the State Department and USAID. The report claimed that women's status is a matter of national security and gave it basically really a high status. Okay. She also believed in data collection about women, especially violence against women. So that was important. She spent a lot of money on research. Okay, but it must be remembered that as Secretary of State, she had the nation's interests in mind first and foremost, and had to willingly subordinate women's rights and other diplomatic and security issues like arms supplies to Saudi Arabia, which also happened during her time. And basically, there are other issues I'm not going into because there are many where actually nations' interests came before other issues. However, women don't have to be foreign ministers to succeed or to be Secretary of State, in fact, to make a mark. Let me just point to 2 cases here, because there are many, and this is where networking helps. Now, this first is, of course, South Sudan. There, in fact, people like Susan Sebit, who is only a lawyer, she engaged with a coalition of 40 women's organizations in peace talks, leading to a gender perspective in basically the final agreement, which was signed, all right? And in fact, this final agreement includes a provision for 35% quota for women's representation, all right, as such. And this was brought about by this women's coalition, by networking and all that, okay? Also, basically setting up tribunals and funding to support rehabilitation of women survivors of the conflict-related sexual violence. Now, the other case is Kosovo, where, of course, in the conflict, 1998, 1999, there were plenty of cases of sexual violence. Now, since 2006, UN Women as a whole has worked with civil society organizations in Kosovo and the Kosovan authorities to get legal recognition for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And here there are many women lawyers. For instance, Diti Haidari, she's a prosecutor of the Special Prosecution Office in Kosovo. And she says that it's never too late to prosecute. And in fact, she encourages women to come forward so that basically this doesn't happen again. Next slide, please. Now, despite advances, it is, however, basically necessary to mention something. And this is actually the UN report 15 years after the Security Council Resolution 1325. And this gives the figures that women still make up only 2% of mediators, 5% of signatories, and 8% of negotiators in peace processes. Now, basically, the recommendations it gives: women's participation is key to sustainable peace. Supporting women peace builders and respecting their autonomy is an important way to counter extremism. A gender lens must be introduced into all aspects of the UNSC. And of course, the UN needs a strong gender architecture. But as of 2021, out of 4060 ambassadors worldwide, only 482 were women, with Sweden taking the lead at 48.1%, followed shortly afterwards, in fact, shortly by Canada. 46.3% women are ambassadors. When it comes to India, in the top diplomatic positions, well, women are negligible, 17.2%, that is in 2021, 21 out of 121. Now, so basically, in conclusion, I want to say that the intentions are being put in place, but there needs to be more women at the helm. And last slide, please, to carry out feminist foreign policy. And women have proven themselves in all kinds of categories, from being basically agricultural producers to heads of state. It's time that more women were appointed in high posts in foreign policy so that they can bring their special diplomatic skills into the service of their respective countries and in the service of international affairs. As we see over here, 1975, there was just one woman, all right, as such, among the ambassadors. But today, in fact, as I told you, there are 48.1% women in Sweden. This can be done. Okay, and the reasons I told you that why we need more women, and basically the gender lens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for generously sharing your valuable time with us. Your insights are not only inspiring, but also incredibly valuable for our growth and development in this field. Thank you so much for shedding light on such a crucial topic. It was truly an honor to have had the privilege to learn from you, ma'am. Now, the floor is open for questions from the audience. You can raise your hands or type in the Q&A box. Meanwhile, I would invite Professor Vibhuti Patel ji for her comments on the session.
Thank you, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, for giving such a vivid profile of and the illuminating role that women diplomats who have challenged patriarchy in the world of diplomacy have performed. When the diplomacy became a profession in the 20th century or early 19th century, the women were not allowed. And I think your last slide also showed that. Now what we see that the marked change in engendering foreign policy, because both women's movement, international women's movement, and the question of transnational solidarity has become so important as a part of agenda of the women's movement. So now women make up about 1/5 of world's ambassador, and also your reflections on feminist foreign policy are extremely important for perspective building of young women getting foothold in foreign services. And you have also told us about seeing wars through the eyes of women, very important. And so many organizations who are involved in the peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping efforts, I think they are also doing a lot of work in changing the mindset of politicians and diplomats. Feminist foreign international relations theory, I think that was a very important insights that you have provided, and your critical reflection on women in the military. I think we all know what kind of human rights violation they are capable of when they also emulate the male model of jingoism. Rape as a weapon of war. I think that is a very important concern that the 21st century planet is facing, where there are 48 geographical locations where the wars are going on, either civil war or the territorial wars are going on. Your inputs on transformational diplomacy, I think that we need a separate session on that topic. But overall, your presentation has been extremely insightful, and there are so many learnings for young public policy makers. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor Patel.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Sampin, can you unmute and speak?
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Ma'am, I had actually just asked a question that said, in your opinion, do women diplomats bring any specific skills or strengths to the table that differ from their male counterparts? So I just wanted you to.
I couldn't really follow you. Can you repeat your question, please?
Sure, ma'am. I asked, in your opinion, do women diplomats bring any specific skills or strengths to the table that differ from their male counterparts?
Yes, in fact, that is what my lecture was about, really. I mean, basically, according to theory, at least, as Professor Patel also noted, that not necessarily do women have to, there is, when it comes to foreign policy, there is this tension because women diplomats are representing their country. So they have to follow what is in the national interest and what they're instructed to do. At the same time, when it comes to basically, when it comes to their countries, but they're also negotiators otherwise. Okay, so when it comes to a gender lens, women are supposed to look at it through a feminist lens, and that is why we have a feminist foreign policy, which is a totally different perspective from the general neutral perspective, which is supposed to be the male perspective, which really doesn't look at gender. But if you look at the victims of war, they're primarily, from ancient times, from the Trojan Wars, it's the women who suffered. Till today in Gaza, if you look at, it's the women who suffer and their children. Okay, so rather than look at militarism, aggression, and domination, they look at the consequences of war, and so would try to prevent the war from happening in the first place. So, in fact, theoretically at least, they're supposed to be more, what should I say, more responsive to suffering, okay, and prevention, rather than basically going ahead and domination. The way they look at the state is militaristic, the real estate is basically aggressive. They do not look at the state in the same manner, because they say that the state does not provide security. Feminists say, all kinds of feminist theorists say that, the state does not provide the kind of security that is required for individuals. Okay, state security is one thing and individual security is another thing. It does not provide the individual security. So therefore, they believe more in cooperation, in collaboration, in, preventing war rather than basically going to war. Okay, does that answer your question? So there is a different gender lens. In fact, that's what I've been talking about right through. There are many gender lenses, not just one. And that is where, in fact, the confusion comes in, all right? Because why? There are many feminist theories. There's not just one feminist theory, okay? So a liberal feminist will look at it one way, a Marxist, Leninist feminist will look at it another way, all right? There's the feminist views of the global south, all right, the black women. So there will be different perspectives, but generally they believe in demilitarization and cooperation, okay? If that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for addressing the question so patiently. And your discourse has truly deepened our understanding of the subject matter. We're truly grateful for your time, wisdom, and encouragement. And we look forward to the privilege of having you as our guest again down the line, ma'am. Thank you so much. Now, moving on to the next session, I'm delighted to call upon Dr. Nivedita P. Haran ji, who will enlighten us on the crucial topic of young women leaders in public services. We welcome you. If you could please take it from here. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Do I start off, or does Professor Patel, you want to take some time, or you're on mute?
You can start, yeah.
I can start, yeah, because I think it's already, I think I'll have to cut short my
No.
talk a bit. I had a short PPT, which I had shared it. If you wish, you can share that on the screen. So when I got the invitation to speak on the presence of young women leaders in public services, I thought I will give it a kind of twist and not talk about just the presence of women in the, as I call it, the public services or the civil services, but women as such doing public service. Next slide, please. Now, if one looks at it from that point of view, of course, when you talk about it, women in the public services, the mind always goes into women in the civil services, and not just at the highest level, but at every level. But that is not just what constitutes public service. I think there is more to it. And I will, as I speak on, I'll delve more and more into it. So public service, as I see it today, as I am going to cover today, would include not just the government service, but also the elected representatives who play a very important role, because elected representatives are actually the policy makers in a way. The government officers may be guiding them, but the actual policy makers and the genesis of policies come from the elected representatives. So we have to include them under public services. The non-government organizations, especially in present times, and even earlier, a lot of the work that government did would not be successful if the non-state agencies were not involved in it. And I say it from my personal experience. And as I go along, I'll give some examples too. So the non-government organizations, by which I mean agencies that are working as think tanks, as mentors, as advisory organizations, play a very, very important role. And that includes many not many, but all the educational institutions that often provide the source of research work, data collection, data collation, analysis. So therefore, they also perform a very important role in public services. The self-help groups coming from Kerala, I find that they play a role, and in present days in India, which is often overlooked. But I find, especially at the grassroots level, the self-help groups are playing a role not just in implementation of projects or enterprises, but also in community building, in disseminating information. They perform a role which is invaluable, which the government could never have done without the assistance of the SHGs. And I believe a lot of other states have also been doing that now. even though it started off from Andhra and Kerala, but many other states have, realizing the importance of the SHGs, have gone into it. And fortunately or unfortunately, maybe fortunately, most of these SHGs at present are women-oriented. The members are women. Of course, the government now allows the presence of men also. But despite that, most of them are women-oriented for different reasons. I will not go into it now. Maybe later, at some point of time, we may discuss that. Then there are other non-state organizations, other agencies, companies, corporates, etc., even the self-employed. They all, for me, come under public services because they are performing a public service. Now, what do I mean when I talk about public service in this broad manner? Is basically anyone who is contributing to the economy, the socio-economic growth of a country is performing a public service. So whether one is generating employment or participating in any kind of employment generating activities, one is doing a public service. Next slide, please. Now, what are the fundamentals of public services? Let me quickly go through it very briefly, and I've tried to put it in a very layman's language. The most important, of course, as we look at it, is the framing of public policies. And public policies does not mean just the passing of an act. It also means ensuring that that act or that policy which has been formulated by the government is implemented, executed, and enforced. Now, these are activities that, again, the government cannot do in isolation. It needs the assistance and the cooperation of many other agencies. The policies that are framed, they have to be linked to existing political, social, and economic structures. Otherwise, no policy would be successful. You can't have a policy in a vacuum. Any policy that comes, and let me very quickly give an idea of what I mean by a policy. I think many of you would be aware of it, but in very, very simple terms and in terms of what actually happens in the government, what is the genesis of a policy? A policy has its genesis perhaps in the manifesto of a winning party that forms the government. That is where a policy starts from. And it gets included in the manifesto, not out of the blue, but there is always a background to it. It could have inputs from pressure groups, from think tanks, from what we call lobbyists, petitions, and these days from the social media, picked up from the social media. So taking all that into this entire gamut of source of information, data, feedback, a party includes something in its manifesto. And when that party comes into power, that item in the manifesto becomes a policy to be implemented. And therefore, in most states, we find that the manifesto of the winning party is normally shared to all the officers in the government who are handling policy-making positions. Now, once that happens, then there is a process that the policy has to go through, that idea has to go through to see the light of day. So depending what the policy is, for instance, if the policy pertains to renewable energy, the idea of it, and so to speak, in government, ideas go through files. The files move through all the departments that would be linked to renewable energy. So transportation, science and technology, finance, you need land for setting up of any solar power stations or anything, a power department, power and electricity department. So all these departments would give their inputs. Thereafter, based on that input, there would be a base paper, which would then be circulated to all concerned outside the government very often, because there will be experts from the institutions, the academicians, the persons from the corporate sector. So get feedback from them. And finally, once the policy paper is complete, that is taken to the cabinet for its approval. So this is, in short, how a policy is formed. Of course, the policy is formed, once the policy is formed, a policy by itself has no, no sanctity unless it is backed by a statute. And therefore, there is an act or a regulation or a government order that backs the policy, based on which that then becomes the Vedvakya. That is what is now the government's policy for implementation, that is passed on to everyone concerned, and that is then to be implemented. So this is in brief how a policy formulation takes place. It often takes sometimes up to months to go through this whole process. If I can give an example, the solar policy, which I was part of, once when it was being drafted, it took more than a year to see the fruition, and similarly for every other policy. It could be very brief also, it could be very short in case there is urgency and in case there is no need for too much of consultation. So that is how a policy formulation takes place. Now, as you would realize, once a policy is to be formulated, it is not in a vacuum, as I said earlier. It takes into account the existing political, social, and economic structure. So if a government decides to formulate a policy, let's say on trade, on external trade, that policy will have to take into account the economic structure of that country, whether it is capable of having a policy of that nature. Can it afford to have that kind of a policy? So all that will have to be taken into account. Then comes the more difficult part, where the government cannot play much of a role, which is reaching these policies and their implications to the public and up to the last level. So you see, if you want to convince a farmer that he should do organic farming, you will have to convince him that it'll be paying, he will get returns from it, the organic fertilizers will be available, and that there will be people willing to buy his products. You see, there are so many ways in which the last mile conviction has to take place, which has to be done using different methods of networking and dissemination of information, as I mentioned in the first slide. There is also need to inform and educate the public. Not often, but sometimes a policy may actually backfire. People may not understand what a policy's intention is, or its, the main aim is. And therefore, information sharing and educating the public is very important. These days, it's a little easier, but it also can be difficult, because the social media can be a double-edged sword. The government can give out some information and some convincing arguments, but then it may actually communicate something totally different. And that can be very difficult. Therefore, all these other agencies that I mentioned, apart from the hardcore civil public servants, they are engaged in acting as the bridge between the policymakers and the executors on the one hand, and the citizens on the other. After all, any policy is for the welfare of the citizens. You see, it has to be for the good of the people. And therefore, that class of people, the citizens, should be convinced that what is coming to us is for our welfare. May I have the next slide? Now, I want to briefly go into the terminologies that have been used in the title of my talk today. Now, let's talk about the young. Why are we talking about the importance, or what is the importance of the young, of being young in this policy, in this public services? It is important, especially important for us, because as we talk about the demographic dividend in our country, which means that more than 65% of our population are below 35 years. And that means that a lot of the people, a lot of the work that is being done as part of public services is being done by persons who are in the age group of around 35. And that is the reason why tackling or approaching the issue from the point of view of the young is important, and I appreciate that. And also, one has to understand that in present times, the young are more technologically savvy. It's a natural ability because they grow up with it. In my time in schools, we didn't have computers, but now every child knows how to handle a computer, a smartphone. Children even know what AI means, what is robotics. You see, these are things that they grow up with. And once a young population grows up with these tools in their hands, it is only right that these are used in the proper manner. And therefore, one has to make sure that any discussion we have on public services, on policy making, keeps in mind the fact that we are dealing with people, we are dealing with a population who are, majority of whom are young, quote unquote. Women. I heard much of the earlier talk. Maybe there could be people who could disagree with me, but I feel that in certain ways, and I say from my experience, taken one-to-one, women can be more single-minded. They can be more committed because they have less distractions. You see, I wouldn't say no distractions, but they have less distractions. I know it's very wrong to generalize and to put people in this kind of silos. But from my experience, I have seen that women are more family oriented. And I'm not talking about women only in the higher civil services. I'm talking about women in general. Because although I was part of the civil service for 37 years, I am now dealing with people who are actually on the ground, with teachers, with farmers, etc. And I find that women, panchayat members, elected members, I'm dealing with, and I find that the women I come across probably are more family oriented. They will ask me questions like, how will it impact me? How will it impact my child? Or my son who's now in a job searching age, what will be the benefit that he would be getting? So therefore, in that sense, I think I mean that. Also, women have this ability to empathize, which I think is something inborn, and nobody can dispute that. Some men have it. I don't dispute that either, but most women have it. They can put themselves into the shoes of the other person, especially when the situation requires commitment and understanding. Women can do that. And I have come across that right from being the SDM to the Chief Secretary. It is the women who come up with the most empathetic solutions. And therefore, I think we should not, often we feel a little kind of hesitant about mentioning it, because we cannot ourselves say that we are more empathetic. It is the men who should be saying it. But I'm being practical here, and I'm being honest here because I'm making a presentation. And I feel from my experience that the ability to empathize, that is inborn in women. We often lose sight of, and therefore many of our policies and public service activities go off tangentially than they should. Of course, there are certain negatives, which more often my male colleagues have brought to my attention, that some women or youngsters can be very hasty, they can be easily misled, they can be over-ambitious, they can be under the wrong influence. But my response is that this holds not just for women, but also for men. In fact, I can give any number of examples where I have had my subordinate misled by wrong information. And in one of the examples I'm going to give at the end, it'll come out. So it is wrong to say, this is a common factor, and therefore we should not delve into it too much. So these are the points that I feel that you have to keep in mind, especially those of you who are planning to work in this area, that there are certain positives that are there of being young and of being women. And by young, I don't mean, very young. I mean in the 30s, even that is young. And that should not be ignored or bypassed. Next slide, please. Now, what has been the advantage, or what is the advantage of women bringing women into the public service? Of course, they bring in more professionalism. And as I said, this is more because women have lesser diversions. And they also bring in diversity. That's a very in word. Everyone talks about bringing in women because of the diversity, but I don't believe that is the only reason, and that cannot be the only reason. Diversity is there in many ways, but they bring in professionalism. They bring in that, what is called that tunnel vision, which often is lacking in a special. I have seen, especially when it comes to implementing a project, when it's a woman who's heading it, anything, it's the midday meal or the improving the condition of the Anganwadis. When one gives it to a woman, she heads it, one finds that the progress and the success of it is much more than if it is not with a woman. Of course, I'm not saying that men cannot do as well or even better. They can, but I'm generalizing in terms of the more likelihood of it being a success is if a woman is heading it. Women make policymaking multidimensional and not just keep it linear. I remember when we were talking about, and now, of course, it's become quite an accepted thing, which is the use of fuel in rural areas. And in the early 2000s, when cooking gas was not available in all places, even in Kerala, when we were having our discussion of the DDC, where we discussed with every district collector, magistrate, and with the elected representative, what are your priorities during the coming year? The women members would always say they would want some solution to the fuel problem. And the reasons are many. One should not just say because the woman has to go and pick up the fuel. It's not just that. The woman who has to go up and forage for fuel, for firewood, for cow dung cakes, or whatever it may be, she has to then come back and send her children to school. And if she doesn't come back on time, her child doesn't go to school on time. She has to come back and cook the meal for the husband who is to go out to work. So you see, it's all linked. And when a woman says that she wants availability of firewood to be the first priority close by, or the availability of potable water to be close by, she has reasons for it, and very logical, cogent reasons for it. Whereas when this discussion took place, the men's response mostly was, we would like the Panchayat road to be much better. We want better connectivity with the city. You see, that is the kind of mindset that one always sees, and it's very evident when you're dealing with such people. They also help make policies more rational and ground-based. And my earlier example is, I think, it brings it out. You see, we are talking about practical solutions, okay? If the woman has to go walk 2 or 3 or 5 kilometers to get the potable water, then imagine the amount of energy she's spending on that. So that's a very rational argument that she's giving, that I want the water pipes to be brought to close to my home so that there is a tap near my home, and even if it's a common tap, we are willing to queue up and take water as and when our turn comes. But I don't need to walk. I shouldn't be made to walk 5 kilometers to get a pot of water. So you see, that is the kind of ground-based rational arguments that women have often bring forth. And the priority of family always comes from the woman. She will talk about the family, education, health, her children, vaccination, transport, if she has school-going children who have to go far off. I remember when, after post-tsunami in 2010-12, we constructed a bridge between the mainland and some islands off the coast of on the Arabian Sea, off the coast of Kerala. I went back after a year or so. I found that the women were overjoyed by that, the bridge being constructed. And their argument was not that the bridge was constructed to give them an escape route in case there was a tsunami. Their argument was that now my daughter, who wanted to go to nursing school, can go to nursing school in Alleppey or in Cochin. You see, they look at things from a perspective which doesn't even come to a father offhand. And then law and order is often a woman's first concern, because her children have to go out, she has to go out, there has to be security. She has to make sure that her children, when they come back, the street lights are working, the bus comes on time, etc. And environment. Women are also very much risk takers, I have found. You see, you ask a woman, I remember once we were doing this, there is a temple in Kerala called the Attukal Devi Kshetram in Trivandrum. And when I was collector there, the practice is that the women sit along the road right up to the temple on the footpath, and they light a little lamp or a fire, and on that they cook a little pongal, khichdi, and they offer to the Devi. And that was a practice. And I remember the police commissioner told me that, no, we can't allow it this year because it goes along the road, it can be a health hazard, a fire hazard, etc. The women came up with a solution. They said that, why don't you stop the traffic for those 2 hours when we are going to sit there, and or divert the traffic. You see, these are kind of suggestions that come to women, which do not come very naturally to many of the others. Next slide, please. The leadership qualities. These are some basic ideas that, for leadership, when I talk about leadership qualities, I mean that these are the few things that a leader should exhibit. He or she should have his basic ideas and beliefs clear. That's important. She should be assertive, a driver, a disciplinarian to some extent, understanding and motivating, and as well as a mentor and counselor, and also willing to learn and correct mistakes. Again, these things, of course, are there in all human beings. But from my experience, having dealt with the Kudumbashri and the SHGs in Kerala, I find that often the leadership qualities, it's easier to develop it in women than in men, especially in younger women. And I say this because I find that the younger women are not only willing to learn, but also learn from their mistakes, which is a very important and very, very commendable quality, which not everyone has. So, in short, what I have tried to do here, and I think I have taken about 20 minutes, I have tried to bring forth why what is the reason why women in public services, what is the kind of value addition that the women in public services bring? Now, it is not a given that women are coming into the public services, etc., etc. But what is also important is that women need support. And they need support not because they are less in any way, but because, as I mentioned earlier, they have a lot of other things to handle. I know in West Bengal, for instance, and I was talking to a friend of mine in West Bengal, a lot of women need support because they have their aged parents to take care of. So therefore, if they need to have a career, they need to have a way to deal with their senior parents. And why do they have to take care of their senior parents? Because the brothers are working outside. They cannot leave their jobs and come back. So the girl is close by, the daughter is close by, she may be married, maybe unmarried, but it's her responsibility to take care of the parents. Now, this kind of situation requires support. And the kind of support that it requires is often not available. And that is the reason why I think, not just people like us, but even others, I'm sure Professor Patel would be doing it with her students, but everyone, in whatever way we can, we should provide that support to the young women who are entering into service. And by service, as I said, I mean the entire gamut of services, and also who are in the service at present. The next slide, please. I now would like to spend about 5 minutes or so bringing to your attention 2 case studies which occurred to me as I was preparing this PPT that I would like to share with you. Now, both of them are from Kerala, and both of them are they're very illustrative of the importance of having active young women engaged in our public services. Okay. Now, Jatayu Park is a park which has been set up about 100 kilometers to the north of Trivandrum. Its background is the following. The place is a hill. The height is about, not very high, height is about, I think, 1,500 feet. And it used to lie as a unwanted area where the local men would climb that rock. It's a kind of a rocky hill. They would climb that hill and use that place for all kinds of antisocial activities, drinking, drugs, etc., etc. I once got a petition from the women of that area who came and told me that, can we not do something with this place? Because it's becoming so bad that we need a police raid there. So we sent a police raid. They found a huge amount of empty liquor bottles and they caught a few men, put them behind bars, etc. But the problem came back again after 3 months. So then we thought that this place needs a solution. You cannot leave it in that, and it's there's a town around it, and therefore you cannot leave it as a fallow land for people, and it was government property. So they kept coming back to me. Now, it so happened that that was a time when the women also told me that on top of that little hillock, there's a little temple which is supposed to be having a footprint of, they claim it is the footprint of Lord Rama. It is a footprint, but of course it must have formed over a period of time, because they believe that that is where Jatayu fell when his wing was cut by Ravana. And then Ram came and found him there. So I said, oh, so the idea came to me that why not develop that place and then make it into a tourist place? And we did that. Okay, we did that. And there is a nice little museum there now. The place is clean. There's a lot of employment generated for the women, etc., etc. Now, when people ask me that how did Jatayu Park come? And they come and, they came and congratulated me that how well this has come up, etc., etc. My response was that this would never have come up unless those women, the group of 20, 25 women had approached me and insisted on finding a solution every time I met them. So you see, the perseverance that these women showed, the insistence that something should be done, and their, in a way, a threat that unless you do something, we are going to take law into our hands, that kind of a threat, that made the entire administration sit up and look at the problem. This is the kind of insistence and perseverance that we need in our society if changes are to be made. The second is another case from Trivandrum. This, I think many of you who have been to Trivandrum have gone to the Padmanabhaswamy temple. There used to be a very nice pond in front of it. Now, somebody set up a trust, a family trust, and got that pond leased out to them. They filled up the pond, started giving it out for commercial activities, and the entire area started getting flooded. I happened to be the revenue secretary at that time, so I canceled the lease. I gave a notice and then I canceled the lease. Those guys, of course, went to the court and pursued it for a long time. But there was an interesting thing here. When I canceled the lease, I got a group of people, of the IAS officers, my colleagues, seniors, juniors, come to me, approach me and tell me, Nivedita, why are you doing it? Don't you know who the trust is? The trust was owned by a retired chief secretary. Okay. And therefore, they wanted me to be cool about it, to be lenient about it and let it go. I said, no, but then who pays for all the flooding that is happening in that area? Who pays for the damages that is being caused to the petty traders in that area? And very simply, how can you give a land to a person and allow him to misuse it, and especially because he is an ex-civil servant? So you see, none of the women came to me. It was always the men who approached me. The cronyism, as it's often used in academics these days, the crony capitalism, the cronyism within the service is so strong that anything you try to do there is always a feeling that no, why should we do it against our own people? Because one day I may have to face the same thing. That is the understanding. But to cut a long story short, these people went up to the highest court, and I think about 6 months ago, their case has been dismissed, and that property has come back to the government, and government has now given orders that it should be dug up and made into a pond again, because that pond is required in that area for conservation of water, for drainage purposes, for the temple, and so on. So you see, this is the kind of difference. And I am not saying I did that because I was a woman, but you need to be persevered. You need to persevere in a manner that you can even, get enemies, but you have to do it. And I think I have seen women do it more often than men do. And women are less cronyist than men are. And that, I think, is important in our present society. And I say this because if we truly are going to be a developed country in 2 decades' time, there is a lot of things we need to do, and a lot of mindset change that needs to come. And that mindset change will not come from me. It will come from you, the younger people. And the women have to play a very, very important role in that. I think in the last slide, I have given a few readings, and they are 2 of the readings that I have not given too much and nothing technical. I think 2 of these books are very good for understanding the role of women in our society. One is Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And this is not just for women, but for everyone. But also Tagore. I'm a huge fan of Tagore, especially these days when I have the time to read it. Gora is a book which brings out the subtlety, the subtleness with which women make difference in life, in families, in the way that society grows. even simple things, that simple changes that happen in our society, often the originator is a woman. And that's something that we learn from Tagore. Many of his writings, we learned that he was a great feminist, but Gora especially so. So I have given you just these two readings, and I expect at least some of you will read these books. I think I'll end here, Professor Patel, because I shortened it and I kept it brief. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I believe I speak on behalf of everyone present here that we are truly grateful for your valuable discussion. Your guidance on navigating such a complex topic has truly been incredibly empowering to all of us. It was a privilege to have had the opportunity to learn from you, ma'am. The floor is now open for questions from the audience. You can raise your hands or type in the Q&A box. Meanwhile, I invite Professor Vibhuti Patel ji to share her comments on the session.
Dr. Nivedita, Haran, you have given such an illuminating examples of women in public service, because one important thing that I have come across over last 50 years of being in education field, holding several portfolios, that there have not been allegation of sexual harassment by women in power, by any women in public offices. So I think that is a one safety which the employees feel, both men and women, both of them feel, the young man and young women, they see is the safe space which women in public office have been able to create. Another thing is that women's ability to use their power for social good. I think you gave ample examples. And the feminist discourse on unlearning hierarchical attitudes in our mindset, no? Like male model of pyramid, which is that, and constantly one hears hierarchy must be maintained, hierarchy must be maintained. It was more so when I was in Bombay University rather than being in a women's university. But as against that, our thinking is that of networking. We had a previous session where Vice President of Mukunda, and she's a woman, and she says that networking and thinking in circles, because in circle anyone can be accommodated and circle can be enlarged. So that is very important. When you talked about cronyism, I think it is everywhere in each and every profession. We see that whole patriarchal brotherhood, which is not always for the good cause. When we were doing PCPNDT Act, so many doctors involved in sex selective abortion, but none of them, they would talk informally, or they would talk gossip about it, but none of them were ready to stick out their neck and come up. No, finally we managed through our research, we also managed to get the data, and then we had a PCPNDT Act, but which is very important point you have made of cronyism. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Professor. Yeah, very, very important points you have highlighted. Any questions? Today's the last day, is it? I think all the participants are tired.
Yes, ma'am.
They have presentations, so they must be today. Their presentations start. The assignments which are given, so they will be. So they must be
Okay.
under tension about making presentations. So.
And that is to start from 4:30.
Today. Yeah, 4:30. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there is no question, I think if there is any later, you can always email it to me. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for articulating such complex concepts and for empowering and encouraging all of us today, so much today, to explore further depths. We look forward to the privilege of having you as our guest again down the road. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and inspiring us to pursue our aspirations with confidence and determination. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we will be proceeding with the presentations from the participant teams. Vibhuti ma'am, if you have any comments or any opening chair remarks to add.
I have just gone through the abstract and concept note and the different methods in which you want to present. I think now we should be given 5 to 7 minutes, 5 minutes per presentation.
Yes,
okay, because today there are 8 of them have expressed their willingness to make presentation. So can we start? 5 minutes for presentation and then discussion and response.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So, first of all, I would like to invite Dr. Pooja Saxena Nigamji. You can start with your presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I'll just need a second to, start my video. Please let me know if my screen is visible.
It's visible.
Okay, just a minute. I'm sorry, I'll just start yeah. So I think it's in the slideshow mode now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is in a working mode, but it's okay because your font size is big. We can read it. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that was on. Yeah, you can go
Now
again.
it is.
Yeah. I'm trying to put it in the slideshow mode. I don't know why it's not working.
It happened once. Yeah.
Yeah, it did. I'm so sorry. I don't know. Now it's not working. Shall I just keep it this way and continue without wasting time?
Yes.
For everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. I decided to take up the topic of changing role of women in the use of common property resources in the context of urbanization in India. On the theme, I think my video not working? The theme that I chose was environment and sustainability. So given the area of economic analysis, we are basically, the idea was to touch upon the productive resources. And productive resources can be categorized in the field of economic analysis in various ways. One such ways are where we categorize resources which are natural resources. So natural resources can be put into the category of open access resources, common property resources, to name a few, which are very critical, particularly in the area of sustainability and also in the area of preservation of environment. So I took up again, there is some problem. Sorry. Okay, now it's saying resume. I'm so sorry. So common property resources, I'm just defining the common property resources because these are resources which basically are used by a community. So they are resources which cannot be typically put into the category of private ownership or public ownership. So they rest with the community. People use them as community. And the examples of which as defined are put here: community pastures, forests, ponds, river bodies, etc., which are very important. And primarily these resources are based in rural areas. So the problem with common property resources are that unlike other resources, unlike other goods, it's very difficult to categorize them according to one, ownership, who owns them. So it's neither the private sector nor the government. It basically rests with the people who use those resources, so communities. And unlike other goods and resources, it's not possible to exclude others from using it. or the notion of rivalry, which is very popular in economics, doesn't work here. Thus, what emerges is that the prices for such resources cannot be fixed. They don't carry with them the market prices. Because they don't carry with them the market prices, the problem is that people tend to overuse these. And in economics, again, in the field of economics, this is broadly known as the tragedy of the commons. Commons is common property resources. They are referred to as commons. And the tragedy is that because people are using them collectively, they do not carry with them an appropriate market price. So people are not actually paying the price for them, and hence they tend to overuse. What does this lead to? This leads to tragedy. The tragedy is we are exploiting these resources, we are degrading them, we are depleting them. So that's the problem. So the problem is of incentives. The problem, as put in this slide, is of government regulation, private property rights. So it doesn't carry all this with this. What works best for the common property resources is what has emerged as a solution by itself, which is a community-based management system. So the communities, or the people, those who use, are the ones who run them. Now, what I have tried, I'm unable to go in details in the presentation in such a short span of time. But if I'm going ahead with the research paper, then all these points will be discussed in the research paper, primarily the use of CPRs, that's the common property resources, governance, and basically the evolution of the role of women in the use of CPRs. So governance is what I have already talked about. So the communities govern them. The uses are, again, the people, the communities who are using. Now, the problem is that, as I said, based in rural areas, now because of urbanization, since my topic talks about urbanization, because of urbanization, these resources which are traditionally in the rural sector are depleting. So grazing lands, farms, forests, these are all depleting. And the problem is that this is making certain sections of people vulnerable. Who all would be vulnerable? The landless, the small and medium farmers, and within this we bring in the category of women, the most vulnerable sections of people in the rural areas who are traditionally users of these common property resources. So there are three things. One is a gender perspective on the use of common property resources, which is where gender is a socially constructed set of identities, the roles, the responsibilities the men and the women take, and the relationships between them. So suppose I'm talking about common property resources only here. So traditionally, women have been doing certain tasks using certain common property resources, be it fetching water from common village ponds or river bodies, or maybe collecting fuel wood from the forests, or fodder collection. All these are women-oriented tasks. Then we also have a men domain. So suppose we're talking about grazing of livestock, that has been a men domain. So majorly wherever women have been participating in the use of common property resources, over time what is happening is, because of depletion of these resources, again because of urbanization, women as users of common property resources are amongst the set of sufferers, major sufferers. Now, this is also because of the societal dynamics that prevail in the rural sector. So I have not been able to touch much upon that in the presentation, but I'm just highlighting quickly a few constraints. I'll put them up in my research paper in detail. Constraints. So women basically lack access to land, productive assets, legal titles to land. These are their constraints. Another constraint is that women do not have representation in the local decision-making bodies. So there is a lack of poor rural organization, which can basically empower them through training. Then the constraint is credit and extension services, which are again male-oriented, lack of women, awareness of their own legal rights. So these are the set of constraints which will be discussed in detail in the research paper. To conclude, we need to look at, only for this presentation purpose, I have to be quick. So the way forward, I have discussed the way forward in three broad contexts. One, what I would call as a peri-urban context. The peri-urban context is basically a consequential result of a rural-urban interaction. It's an interface between the rural-urban activities, institutions, social, economic, environmental systems that are coming up, because there is an agrarian system, there is an urban system, and there is a natural resource system. So what is the interface with urbanization? How does this take us forward? That means, how do the various responsible authorities, institutions come in place and discuss the issue of declining common property resources, the role of women in this context, in the peri-urban context. Another way forward is specifically the role of government or the state. So they know that the resources are depleting. So what exactly can the government do? Government can take steps. For example, forests are depleting. Women have been working in collecting fuel wood from the forest. So if forests are depleting, what exactly can the government do? Government can undertake social forestry programs, extension forestry programs, afforestation in public places, rehabilitation of degraded forests, etc. So the role of government is the way forward. And then the role of NGOs and international organizations, as well as government. So government can also come in creating self-sustaining organizations, particularly for rural poor women, which not only empowers them, but also gives them access to participation in the management of CPRs. So this is the way forward that I thought I would discuss, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pooja ji. That was a really interesting and comprehensive presentation. I would just like to talk about the serial order that we are going with. So first of all, it was Pooja Saxena ji. This will be followed by Rishika Patel ji, then Suniti ji, then Shwetamma ji, then Pallavi ji, then Jesti and Varsha ji, then Riya ji, then Rashmi ji, which will be followed by Dr. Meghna Kumari ji, and lastly Aditi Chaudhary ji. I will also be putting this in the chat box for reference. So Rishika Patel ji, you can go ahead with your presentation now.
Only one suggestion to Pooja Saxena ji, how
Yes,
the smart city mission going to impact the common resources that you can take up in your final,
Yes.
when you finalize your paper.
Yes, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Sure, ma'am.
Yes. So my topic is access to urban spaces, something similar. I've chosen to do a poetic documentary of sorts to for my creative project. I'll just present that. Give me a second. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear it?
We can, yes.
चाय की तकलीफ है चाय बहुत मिले अच्छा जब मैंने कहा तो आदित्य सोचने लगा होती है रस्ते कुछ करने की सोच तो ऐसे से मैंने अपनी ये रस्ते में जाती है कि कोई देख रही थी चाय की तकलीफ तो तो चाय की सकता है अरे भैया सब मैं डायरेक्ट तो चेक सेंटर नहीं क्या माँ बाप ने सिखाया नहीं घर आने का रास्ते की लंबाई ऐसे ऐसे घूमने की जगह बस ये तो नहीं सेट करा नहीं थी इसको पसंद है ऐसे घूमने से ग्रैंड कर नहीं मैं शहर से वो कोने में जहाँ मन की रोशनी नहीं पहुंच पाई और रात में तो ये सर्जरी तो माँ बाप का नाम और उसके मेल हाल से ऐसी तो घूमने चलने की बंदी है बस टाइम से बिगड़ आना है जाना काम में वो पसंद का दिल्ली में खाना बस फिर क्या था सब कुछ खबर नहीं है और शहर के कोनों को ज्ञान मिलने में कहाँ लग रहा था अभी तक कहती खाना करता है इसी तरह से है कुछ नहीं रहा खबर करने वाला है ना खबर वाले भी नेता है तो सभी खुद तुम्हारे जाने के बारे में तुम्हारे और रख नहीं तुम्हारे मीटिंग एजेंडा बनाएगा अरे भैया इलेक्शन वाला साल है and this will have the audacity to gather millions of us and scream from a podium about what they're telling us. Right? that was it from my side. I wanted to talk about access to urban spaces because ever since industrialization, urban areas have become the sources of employment and education for us. But when we say my access to a certain institution is um, imperished because I am not able to travel as easily, or I am not able to accommodate my routine into it because I have to take a different route because there is male gaze, there is sexual harassment on the streets. These are the issues that come in a way to access to such opportunities. To cater to those, we could look at technological advancements, we could look at community-based interventions and structural changes in how we construct our public spaces altogether. I've talked about this in detail in my research essay, but for the creative project, I wanted to do the video. That's from my side. Thank you.
Rishika ji, the last frame in which you have given the quotation, you should put it for nearly 5 to 7 seconds. We could hardly read. We could not read for more than two words. No, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Suniti ji, you can go ahead.
Sure. Let me just present my screen. Is it visible?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sunidhi Sampige. I'm currently a second-year student of an undergraduate program, and I'm from Bangalore. The topic that I have chosen for my research essay is about the popular show Gilmore Girls. My topic is navigating gender equality and empowerment in the world of Gilmore Girls. The reason I've chosen this topic is because the importance of pop culture in our lives is more important now than ever. We see that this early 2000s show has such a wide range of female characters that has not been seen ever before. We see that most of the important characters are women, and they each contribute a different aspect to the town which they live in, which is a fictional town called Stars Hollow. Speaking about the first character, this is the main character of the show. Her name is Lorelai Gilmore. In a time where teenage pregnancy and single motherhood, especially like in the early 2000s, it was condemned. This was one of the shows that portrayed the main character as a single mother who raised her child without help from a husband or anyone else for that matter. She worked at an inn by herself and raised her daughter similarly. We see that since she is a teenage mother, she goes through a host of changes herself as well as her daughter. This is actually a photo essay which includes stills from the show to portray each character's depth, and the analysis will be told by me. We see all these stills. We see the first one is her daughter talking about her during her graduation. There is another scene where she is sympathetic towards her daughter's situation, even though she doesn't know what the reason for it is. The next main character is Rory Gilmore, whose name is also Lorelai Gilmore. Her mother is named after herself. There is a joke that Rory says that, you know, my mother named me after herself. She is really a feminist icon, isn't she? We see Rory as an ambitious girl who, rather than faltering for romantic relationships in her teenage years, is extremely driven and charged to become a journalist that was in the early 2000s, specifically male-dominated occupation. We see that she's extremely driven for her academic insights, and she sets her sights on first going to Harvard, which is one of the most prestigious universities, and ends up getting into almost 3 Ivy League colleges, but then ends up going to Yale. As you can see, this is one of the most famous dialogues from this series, which says, "Who cares if I'm pretty, if I fail my finals?" So we see how she is extremely driven and she's extremely ambitious in what she wants to do in her life. And it is extremely refreshing to see a female lead and a teenager who is like this. Moving on, we see Paris Geller. Now, Paris Geller is Rory Gilmore's classmate. We see her as a typically masculine type of woman who has masculine attributes. She is what we would call a bully, but we would also see how she changes over the years with Rory. And we see how, though she is extremely ambitious and rash and driven to the point where she could even put others down, which are technically traits that are attributed to men. But we see that a woman character in her teenage years is also like this. She says, "I want to win, and I'm going to win." That shows her competitive spirit, and this is just for a school project, if I may add. The second scene that I pulled up is we're girls, so we could only be arguing about a boy, right? And the ironic part is they were, ironically. We also see how she says, "Give me more homework, it'll keep me off my mind." Other quotes include, "I have a life after I graduate from Harvard." So we see how she's extremely driven, and she is competitive. She takes part in debates, and she has crushing arguments, even to put down the men in front of her. Finally, this is one of the main things that I wish to address in my research paper, which is the intersectional feminism that is present in Gilmore Girls. We see this through the Kim family, which who are an Asian American Korean family who live in Stars Hollow. We see that the rest of the show is typically white, upper class women who have a say in society, regardless. But these are Korean women, they are immigrants, and they have her mother has strict rules for her in her house. Despite these strict rules, we see how Lane Kim, the daughter, uh, makes an image for herself. She becomes the bass player and a drums player in a band, even without her mother's permission. We see one of the scenes where she colors her hair, despite being from an extremely Orthodox Christian family, and 2 minutes later, she dyes her hair back to black. So we see that she embodies a kind of quiet empowerment because she rebels against her mother's strict rules, and she defies the strict traditions that Christianity has put forward on her. She pursues rock music, as I said before, by becoming a lead drum player in a band. And she finds her voice despite being a secondary character. She is only Rory's best friend in the show, but we see how she has a voice of her own at the end, and she grows to be an imposing young woman. This is one of my favorite scenes from the series, and this is what I would like to conclude on. One of the girls asks Lorelai, "So girls go on adventures too?" And Lorelai replies, "And they go in heaps." All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Suniti ji. That was a very unique presentation, and I'm sure you've convinced all of us here to watch Gilmore Girls. So thank you so much. Vibhuti Patel, ma'am, if you have anything to add, any suggestions?
In their life worlds, what has been the position or status of men and boys? In the life worlds of these women, what has been the position or space for men?
Sure, ma'am. Ma'am, we see that most of the male characters are secondary characters in this show. That has been done intentionally. We see that the man who is Rory's father is completely absent from her life most of the time. But there is an important male figure in their town called Luke Dames, who helps Rory throughout her lives and acts as a fatherly figure to her. So he's one of the main male dominant male figures in the series. As well as we have a lot of men in the town who help both of them grow as people. One could be the town head. His name is Taylor. There is also a man called Michelle who works in the inn that Lorelai is a part of. And we see that this person, Michelle, does not conform to the traditional male standards. We could say he is also a does not cater to the heteronormative standards. Even though he is a straight man, we see that he has a good sense of style. He has a Parisian accent. He loves dressing himself up, as well as eating extremely good and eating extremely good food and extremely healthy traits that we would typically associate with women. So these are the important male characters as well.
Are there gender minorities in the film?
As I said before, it is typically catered to a higher upper middle class background, because these are women. At the end of the day, Lorelai does come from a rich family, and she gets a lot of money from her family, even though she is technically raising her child alone. But we see the presence of many minorities, such as Egyptians, as well as African Americans as well, and Asian Americans, like I mentioned, Koreans. So, despite there being less number of minorities, we see that they play an important role in the in the series, both as supporting characters, but also as whole characters on their own. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Suniti ji. Now, Shweta Maharaji, you can go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Hi, good evening. So my topic is women harassment at workplace. I have selected a very, I can say cliche, or all the norms and the rules that are already existing at place. So I have chosen this topic only because of my real life experiences, not just with me, but with my colleagues and with my friends around, be it college, be it school, or be it my own workplace, and multiple workplaces, not just one workplace or one institution as such. So I have basically dealt with like what is sexual harassment at workplace, the existing laws in place, and mostly I have focused on findings of current scenario, whereabout I have conducted. Okay, I'll like explain as it comes. So the first slide I have basically described about what is sexual harassment, or what are the things which could be counted in as sexual harassment as well as non-sexual harassment, and the various definitions, the various clauses which could be counted in, that could be the physical contact, or even for a demand or request for sexual favors, and the making sexual colored remarks, or any kind of unwelcome physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of a sexual nature. Thereafter, I have dealt with the already existing laws at place, which I think most of us here at this forum at least are aware of. That is the sexual harassment of women at workplace. Then the Vishakha guidelines provided by the Honorable Supreme Court, and then the She Box and the various initiatives by Ministry of Women and Child Development in particular, and also the constitutional framework, which are basically dealt in our fundamental rights through Article 15 and 19. Then I have mostly tried to focus on the current scenario despite existing laws, that though there are laws in place, but still, according to various data by NCRB or by the survey conducted by Indian Bar Association, there are alarming number of cases which show that though there are laws in place, but still we need to, on the ground, on the plate, it is people are still suffering, and people are still not aware of a lot of things. So mostly my research or my analysis would be around this. That is the verbal anecdotes which I've conducted via a survey, where I've used verbal anecdotes to the people who cannot like fill the Google form, or kind of like fill any kind of give any kind of written data to me through a survey or anything like that. So so far for this PPT, I talked to 4 people. One was my household maid, second one was Anganwadi nurse, and third a primary school teacher, and one was an IT corporate profession. So the research paper in which I'll be presenting, I mean, after a few days. So there I will be talking in detail about how and what were my method of collection of data, how did I arrive at the conclusion, and also I use various tools like I use pie graphs, pie charts, graphs, and data simulation models where I dealt about how this is still a big loophole in our society, that this thing still exists despite various laws in place. So my verbal questions to them, especially the household worker and the Anganwadi worker, was this: like, what is sexual harassment, and have they ever come across this situation? If they have, then are they aware of this term that this is known as sexual harassment, and how do they report this, and are they aware of this existing laws, and has anybody ever helped with them via this or not? So I'll be discussing more about this on my the paper which I'll be presenting, the research analysis which I'll be doing, and also the abstract a few weeks back which I've shared. So I've got valuable feedbacks from Vibhuti ma'am that these things are already in existence. So what I would be actually researching and analyzing over it. So ma'am, in due through 2-3 weeks of time, I was busy conducting whatever time I used to get apart from my work and study. I was busy conducting these things. So far verbally, so I'm like, I've got answers that it's a no. It's like many people even don't know, and these people, these household, these sweeper, these nurses, I mean, for them too, it's a big challenge. Even if we talk personally about me, okay, I know about the rules and the laws and the rules, but if you still ask me like ASAP who I have to report, even I would still take a minute or so, something to think upon, that which on Google I will type how to report, or which Google number to find. Like for ambulance we dial, for police we dial 100, for ambulance we dial some number, for fire stations we dial some number, but for these things we don't we are not aware which number to dial exactly and how to report about these things. So basically I'll be doing more work on this rather than what has been done. It's done. Like obviously it's the laws in place. I mean, our seniors have worked hard to put the laws in place, but we as a common person, how do we implement it and how do we learn to implement it? That awareness I want to spread from my end at least.
So I think when it comes to metadata, you can use pie chart and diagrams and bar chart. But
Yes.
this your main strength is the in-depth case studies of these 4 women whom you have interviewed, and also your personal. You can anonymize the interview. You need not give their reveal their identity. And also, what motivated you and to dwell on this topic? So that would be your narrative qualitative analysis is your strength of your paper. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your inputs.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Now, Pallavi ji, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Reet. I am not able to see the share screen option. Can you
Please
just-
join as panelist, Pallavi.
How do I do that? Should I
No. Did you get notification?
join as panelist? Okay, yes. Yes. So share screen option. Is it visible now?
Yes.
It is in working mode. You can make it slideshow.
Right, ma'am. I'll just... Yeah. So it's in the slideshow now?
Yeah.
So this is I'm Pallavi, and I am presently working as the area chair for Department of Political Science at G.V. Goenka University. And prior to this, I have completed my PhD from Law and Governance, JNU, and where I was looking into the question of institutional forms of violence against women. And in that, I had picked up the case study of women in protective homes, shelter homes. There I realized that the women victims of violence were obviously housed, and obviously this came very late with the when CETA was Suppression of Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act was amended, and in 1986 when these shelter homes were there, and they started seeing women as victims and not as perpetrators of certain offenses. But sadly, what I realized was that these women who have been victims of direct forms of violence were actually facing newer forms of oppressive mechanisms within these institutions, which were not so much visible in their nature. And instead of challenging or instead of empowering women, they were rather preserving those patriarchal practices, whether it was rehabilitation through reunions, family settlements, restricting women's movement, teaching them, the normative values, the social norms. So these were the experiences that women were undergoing in those closed boundaries, so hidden away from the common eye of the people. And there I realized that there is a need to revisit violence. In my PhD, I was interrogating the idea of protection. With that, I moved on to investigate violence as a concept. Somehow the idea of violence got sidelined and just got busy with other professional familial engagements. And thank you so much, IMPRI, for giving me this opportunity for revisiting my long lost, incomplete pending project, where I really wanted to investigate violence. And with all these presentations that we had before, all the engagements that IMPRI provided us with, they did give a lot of food for thought to understand violence as beyond how it has been defined all this while in the policy domain. So I am working on, this is still an unfinished project, and this is just a proposal, and your inputs will be really valuable to me, for me to shape the project and get into the field with a nuanced understanding on violence. So I'm trying to revisit and rethink the idea of violence against women, and the focus area here I'm picking up is domestic spaces. Here I'm trying to understand, how there are these forms of violence that exist, conceptualizing violence as within its twin category. One, which is invisible oppressive mechanism that operates within patriarchal domains, where there are certain norms that women are supposed to follow, and certain cultural pressures that they experience, also due to other factors of poverty, deprivations that exist. So these are the invisible oppressive mechanisms. As against that, there are visible criminal acts against women that women experience as violence, in the form of rape, trafficking, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to argue out in my paper is that it is these invisible oppressive mechanisms, the biases, the prejudices, the discriminations against women, which are categorized within the larger domain of structural violence, and they lead to what we call direct violence, which involves wife beating, trafficking, and so on. And this direct violence hence results in endemic marginalization of women. So this is the framework where I'm trying to build my work or the paper on. So here, to begin with, I am highlighting the various direct forms of violence which are visible and invite criminal proceedings. Now, these have legal recognition in terms of physical injury, wife beating, sexual exploitation, rape, dowry deaths, forced marriages, child marriages, and so on. We have various committees that have worked on defining violence, where a J.S. Verma committee defined violence as, deprivation of the fundamental right to live with dignity, where United Nations as late as 1993 recognized violence in terms of physical, sexual, and mental harm or suffering to women, which includes threats, acts, of coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. Now, amidst all these wider definitions of violence, what falls short is that violence against women starts even before their birth in the form of sex selections and feticide. So, to understand this entire life cycle of violence against women, I went back to Zimmerman and Ellsberg and realized that they had classified various stages of violence, how it permeates to the next stage, and which starts with the pre-birth stage, where there is sex selection and there's abortion, sex-selective abortions are there. Then we have at the stage of infancy, we have infanticide, malnutrition, child abuse. Then at the stage of childhood, we have abuses like trafficking, child labor, child marriage, rapes. At the stage of adolescence, there is exploitation, there is trafficking, there is forced marriage, there is rape, there are acid attacks. And at the stage of adulthood comes in crimes such as domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, sexual harassment at workplace, dowry deaths, honor killings, forced conceptions and forced abortions, and so on. So while these are those visible forms of violence that are that reflect in the entire life cycle of women, there are certain situation-based violence also that exist. Here, women are treated as objects of oppression, regulation, and vengeance, particularly in areas of conflict and war, whether voluntary or forced migration, due to certain climatic and natural disasters. Then there is this custodial crimes that exist, and then there are domestic crimes. The vulnerability of women is not limited to these direct forms of violence. What I am trying to argue is the existence, the persistent presence of indirect forms of violence, which are invisible in nature and lack policy definition. These forms of violence, basically, they emerge out of inherent structural inequalities as a consequence of poverty, racial and ethnic discrimination, certain economic inequalities, and so on, and are reflected in public and private life in terms of limited access to employment opportunities, such as there are wage differentials, problems of leave benefits, sexual harassment at workplace. Then also in terms of services, where women have limited financial literacy and are unable to access banking services. In terms of amenities, we have had extensive discussions on how women have to fetch water and how these serve as disadvantages and varied levels of disadvantages how women experience due to lack of access to basic amenities. Then there is healthcare facilities. There are these issues around institutional deliveries and health and the entire wash that is working towards it. Then there are certain deprivations and indirect forms of violence when it comes to lack of access to education, whether it is due to reasons of infrastructure or reasons of poverty. So with all this, what we understand is that women are adversely impacted and hence experience violence in its indirect form, and how these forms of violence, they percolate or penetrate into domestic spaces. Coming to now, these indirect forms of violence have been summarized within the larger category of structural violence. And John Galton first took up in his seminal work on peace research, and where he talked about structural violence as impairment of fundamental needs. By fundamental needs, he implied four. One is survival, and a negation of this survival implied death or mortality. Another fundamental need was classified as well-being, and a negation of well-being implied poverty, illness, and misery. Third was identity, and a negation of this implied alienation. And lastly, he explained was the freedom, and a negation of that implied oppression and repression. Now, when we move on, when we try to fit in women into this frame of structural violence, we move into what I discussed earlier as, women's limited access to healthcare, education, labor rights, and so on. Now, the wider studies on violence have largely focused on direct forms of violence. They have ignored these structural aspects, which is, especially within the private spaces, which is where the policy fails to address the problem of domestic violence. Domestic violence has too many connotations attached to it, where it is about where it is not just about wife beating, it is not just about dowry murders, it is not just about honor killings. It is also about the experiences that women undergo in the presence of the perpetrator and in the absence of the perpetrator, and how those experiences are realized. They come into reality due to these uh, uh, you know, structural inequalities that exist even before in their life. So here I am trying to explain the mechanisms of structural violence. That is one, these were also outlined by Gautam, and explained how exploitation emerged as unjust socio-economic relations. These are the various factors that highlight the presence of structural violence in domestic spaces. So in the form of exploitation, where there are unjust socio-economic relations, in terms of division of labor and unequal share in resources leading to impoverishment. Then there is penetration, which implies the ideological implantation within the collective, where the women are made to believe that yes, they are they are in need of protection, and there's this false consciousness that makes them believe that this protection is for their benefit. And in the name of this protection, what they do is internalize various forms of violence. Then the next mechanism through which structural violence operates in domestic spaces is segmentation, where these power relations that are operating are obscured. They are treated as lesser beings, and they're made to believe that they are ones. Also, another phenomenon is marginalization, where they are excluded from the public domain and employment opportunities. And this certainly impacts their presence in the private spaces, their authority to take decisions, their choices, everything gets impacted with this entire marginalization or exclusion. Lastly, I also move on to explaining deprivation, which implies deprivation in terms of freedom and nutrition, dignity, and rights over their bodies in terms of reproductive rights and etc. So in a nutshell, my work has moved on to a stage where I have been able to get some inputs to understand. The biggest challenge that I'm facing is how to measure these structural forms of violence. But if I look into the narratives that that were cited, and for the lack of time, it is not possible for me to cite the narratives here. But yes, just picking up those small points from there, and where women responded, stating and explaining that how they have internalized these structural violence and they are not even aware that this exists, is that I just stay at home and do the daily routine, nothing special. Yes, I do fasting and follow rituals on special occasions, such as Karwa Chauth, for the well-being of my husband. His health and long life is important for me and my children. My in-laws don't like wearing Western wear. I wear saris now. My daughter wears suits only, and of subtle restrictions, how they get intensified gradually is coming up in the next stage of their expressions. My family loves me. Sometimes they do shout and scold me, but when I don't work properly or break something, but that's okay. Nobody treats me with love. They do humiliate me and they call me names. I cannot eat when I want. My hands shiver because of hunger. I cannot move freely beyond this boundary. They say I need to be protected. I want to work and earn for myself. They don't allow me. They neither help me. So this is the next level of intensification of violence against women that they experience. And from here starts the direct modes of violence. So what I am wanting to conclude here is that behind every act of direct violence, there is a form of structural violence that operates indirectly on women, which to this date lacks definition in laws and policies on violence. So here I'm going to look into these various aspects, and this is the future scope of my study, where indirect violence, I have to see it as violence as protective surveillance, violence as moral surveillance, violence as behavioral regulation, violence as normative discipline, violence as material deprivation, and violence as ambient fear, where even if the perpetrator is not present, but the fear or the experience of violence keeps haunting the victim. And this is how the study is expected to proceed in future. And here is a small video which I would like to, it's just a 5 seconds, 10 seconds clip. And this is a way of summarizing. This was prepared by one of my students, and to explain how violence very subtly operates and how it leaves impressions and marks on the lives of women, and which is not recognized in the policy framework. I'm just playing it. Please let me know. So thank you so much. That's what I believe in. Change is not easy, but the struggle must go on. And with this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you so much.
Are you going to include the issue of mental well-being?
Yes, ma'am. Certainly, when it comes to, I mean, that is a domain beyond my understanding, and I had to really get into some works maybe on the psychological aspects. I will definitely look into aspects of mental well-being, because the moment I talk about ambient fear, the issue of mental well-being comes into picture. So certainly that is one aspect. I was a little scared of picking that up. I know it opens a lot in terms, but now that you've said, so I will take this up, and I will definitely try to work on that also.
Thank you so much, Pallavi-ji, for such
Lot
a...
of work, lot of labor has gone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. So this is all Professor Neerja Gopal is my supervisor, and she has been guiding me all this while on, to look into the various nuances where you cannot ignore one aspect and think of arriving at a conclusion. So, and certainly this entire workshop has been really unique and motivating. It has been really pushing us to stretch beyond our comfort zones and look into challenging aspects of various forms of violence against women. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, Jesti ji and Vasha ji, you can go ahead with your presentation. So you've shared the video with us. For that, Priyanka ji, if you could please present the video.
Sure. If they would like to present from their system, that is also fine.
Yeah,
Would
we
you like
can do
to?
that. Yeah.
Okay, okay, sure.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So it's been a great pleasure to join these sections, and especially to Pallavi-ji for especially broadening on that topic. With that, I'll start with our topic today. I, Justice Karya, along with Varsha Jose, is going to present as a group on the topic of sexual and reproductive health in Rohingya refugee people. So the theme that we have, the title that we have given to this theme is that Unheard Crisis, the Sexual Reproductive Health Crisis in Rohingya Refugee Camps. So it is said that Rohingyans are a minority community which are considered as the most persecuted in the world. And among them, 50% of the refugees are women. And we know that in a situation where there is war and in any crisis situation, women and girls are the most affected one. So, and most of the time, sexual and reproductive issues and health issues are often neglected. So we would like to to touch that topic, and we'd like to expand on that topic. And also we have tried to suggest some policy solution regarding that. So, and the medium that we have chosen is a video essay. So I would like Varsha to present that. Varsha, we can't hear the voice audio.
Varsha, please also unmute yourself.
Okay. The Rohingya people, a Muslim minority, have faced decades of persecution in Myanmar. Since 2017, violent attacks against the Rohingya triggered a mass exodus. Now, hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees live in overcrowded camps in Bangladesh and elsewhere in South Asia. Women and girls bear a disproportionate burden of this crisis. Today, we examine the dire state of sexual and reproductive health among Rohingya women, the challenges they face, and what must be done. Rohingya women in refugee camps face overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, limited access to necessities, and neglect of sexual and reproductive health needs due to focus on survival. Many have experienced trauma, compounding the impact on their physical and mental health. Within camps, Rohingya women encounter severe shortages in sexual and reproductive health services. Challenges include lack of contraception access, unsafe births, heightened risk of gender based violence, and early marriage, placing significant strain on women and families. The sexual and reproductive health crisis intersects with cultural barriers, limited female healthcare providers, and low education and awareness. Traditional norms, discomfort with male providers, and lack of information perpetuate harmful practices, making it difficult for women to seek essential healthcare. Some policy solutions. Ensuring sexual and reproductive health services for Rohingya women in crisis requires a multi-pronged approach. Firstly, implementing the Minimum Initial Service Package (MISP) is crucial. This internationally recognized standard outlines essential SRH interventions
during conflict and displacement situations. Studying successful MISP implementation cases can provide valuable insights. Secondly, a gender sensitive approach is vital. This involves prioritizing female healthcare workers, providing confidential and culturally appropriate spaces, and training healthcare professionals to build trust with this vulnerable population. Thirdly, integrating with the host country's healthcare system is essential. Successful examples include training local medical staff on refugee specific needs and expanding service access. Finally, addressing the trauma and gender based violence faced by Rohingya women is critical. This can involve establishing safe houses, providing legal aid, and implementing community based programs. By implementing these comprehensive strategies, we can strive to ensure essential SRH services for Rohingya women navigating complex crisis situations. In the midst of adversity, the principle of sexual and reproductive health persists as fundamental human right. It is crucial to prioritize the comprehensive overhaul of policies, allocate significant investment into essential services, and systematically dismantle societal barriers to ensure the advancement of Rohingya girls and women.
Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your presentation. Vibhuti ma'am, if you have any suggestions.
In your policy solution, you need to talk about gender responsive budgeting to address the reproductive and health needs, both at a subnational level, national level, and even the global community and the UN women, their responsibility for this target allocation of funds, functionaries through the budgetary allocation. So gender commitments get translated into budgetary commitments and financial commitments. That should be a very important thing, because the scarcity of fund doesn't allow the, good quality services as well as even the habitat in which they live, no? Which are also responsible for reproductive health crisis. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We will definitely look into that. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, Riya Pandey ji, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Just a second.
Yeah.
Just let me know if the audio is being heard.
No, there's no audio right now.
It's not.
No.
Then how do I just share the, or maybe you guys can share it because I mailed this video.
Try going full screen again, Riya.
Yeah, sure. Is it audible?
Go on the next cursor.
This slide control.
Yeah, slide control, bottom left. Bottom left. Go to bottom left
Okay.
with your cursor. Yeah.
Sorry, just a, I think there's something like I'm not able to understand. Just give me a sec.
In the screen, go to bottom left.
Yeah, so where do I get the option of sharing the audio?
No, you can go to bottom left. In the screen, come to bottom, take your cursor below. Just move your cursor a bit.
Or maybe I can present it at the end. Anything would work.
Okay. Okay. Preet, we can go to next.
Yes, sir. Rashmi ji, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the topic which I have taken is impact study on early childhood education policies in India. So early childhood education is very important in today's generation, as we focus on saying today's learners are tomorrow's leaders. So we are focusing here on the policies which are made for these children, and along with these children also the women involved in the betterment of providing services to these children from the age group of 3 to 8 years old. So this study basically covers all the challenges, the policies which are incorporated, and what are the impact from these policies which have been implemented. So moving on, talking about the background of early childhood education policies in India, the first pre-primary education was the National Policy on Education, which was its inception was in 1986, and it purely was on the early learning of these children. So this was the first policy which was incorporated, and later on moving further further policies were also implemented, like something like ICDS, that is Integrated Child Development Services, which was in 1975, and followed by the NCRT frameworks and the NEP policy. Here the government has also given a broader framework on the Nipun Bharat policy, which states that all the children by grade 3, they have to be very uh, good in literacy and numeracy skills by end of grade 3. So here the foundation levels have been focused, and the foundational literacy and numeracy in the age of 0 to 8 has been a focus. And coming to the recent updates, we also have the National Education Policy, which was incorporated in 2020. Along with these policies, we also have other policies like Samagra Shiksha policy, which is completely focusing on quality education to improve the learning outcomes of the early years. So, going to this impact study, so I have got an opportunity to visit a few sites, which are the preschools in semi-urban areas and anganwadis in rural areas. And here I got to conduct a few observational studies and interviews of the Anganwadi workers, helpers, and the CDPOs. And here we also like tested a few children on their holistic development, especially on the literacy and cognitive levels. So a lot of activities were conducted with the children to understand their skills as per their age group. So these are some snippets of the visit. So the findings of this impact study was, after the policies have been incorporated, the enrollment rates have been increased. So earlier there were children, the parents used to take them along with them while they go to work. Uh, Basically the daily wages workers. So after these Anganwadis and Balwadis have come into existence, these children now go to Anganwadis and Balwadis, where the focus is on their nutrition as well as the educational aspects. There are other facilities also provided for these children, like immunization and the healthcare facilities as well. So due to which the enrollments have been increased, and now the parents are willing their child to go to these Anganwadi centers because they are taken care of very well. And also the cognitive gains of the children have increased, especially in language and mathematical skills, as the focus is not only on the nutrition, the focus is as well as on the education part of the children, and lot of hands-on activities have been conducted with these children in Anganwadis. And as the group activities also have been conducted in the Anganwadis, there is a lot of increase in the social aspect as well. Now children are able to mingle with each other, have social interaction, the emotions level have been increased. So these are some of the developments. And now after these Anganwadi workers have been promoting the policies and have been addressing the communities and encouraging them to send their children to Anganwadis, the parental involvement has also been increased. The parents have now started supporting their children, asking them what did they learn in Anganwadis, and what did they do with their friends today. So there are a lot of parents also conduct a few activities hands on at home as well, with the use of fruits and vegetables, or the items they have at home with related to language and numeracy. So there is a lot of and hand in hand support from parent as well. So the positive effects of early childhood education policies have been like there is academic readiness now. Now the children, where they say that children should attend grade 1 at the age group of 6. So these Anganwadis and preschools now focus on 3 to 6 years old, where they make the children school ready, and whatever basic concepts the children should learn in this age group, they have complete focus on that. And the nutrition levels have also been increased, as the policies on nutrition as also have been implemented. And coming to Anganwadis, there is a particular month, that is the September, where this Poshan Abhiyan is focused on, and the Anganwadi workers along with the community, they celebrate this month, and they also educate people on the nutritional values. And coming to the community engagement as well, due to early childhood education, the now the government has released so many documents and so many policies related to home learning, coming to after school support, etc., where the community, and also these community days also have been into process. So there is engagement as well from the community. And coming to the gender parity here, the education system is such that now the girl child, earlier what used to happen is the elder one used to stay at home, taking care of the younger ones, the sisters and brothers at home, and the parents used to go to work. So now that the parents are also educated to send their children, so this compulsory education, and nowadays the girl child ratio also has been increased. So along with the boys, now parents are very keen on getting their girls also educated. The challenges what we find in implementing these policies are like the resource allocation. So there is very limited resources from government's end, where which hinders this process of policy implementation. And the quality of education maintained, especially in some of the balwadis and anganwadis, also remain a little untouched, because a lot of Anganwadi workers or the teachers or the caregivers are not trained on how to take care of the children, how to educate them. So a lot of education aspect they do not focus on. So there is a little quality issue in terms of education. And as I said, the teacher training part. So most of the teachers, they would have got the training while they were recruited, maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and after that there is no training happened to a few, where they get adapted to new technology or new trends which are going on. And coming to the monitoring and assessment bit, a preschool system might focus on the holistic approach, and they would monitor the children, the learning outcomes of the children. But coming to Anganwadis, due to their registers and register maintenance and the other day-to-day work, they are not able to focus on the assessments of the children or monitoring the learning outcomes of the children, how the children are progressing. So these are some of the challenges which we could see broadly. And coming to the recommendations for improving these implementation of the policies are for the government and policy makers. So the investment should increase on the infrastructure and resources of Anganwadis. Now that there is this Bala model which has been incorporated in Anganwadis and rural preschools, where they use this building as a learning tool, and a lot of painting is happening on the building as well, and they're providing chairs and tables to the children, etc. But it is not happening at a scale. It is happening at a very few places, and there is a need to increase the investment on the infrastructure so that children get better benefits, and the ones who are undeserved in the undeserved area get more focus on. So also on the monitoring and supervision mechanism, due to their other apart from the academics, they also have this administrative work, and due to which even there is too much burden on the Anganwadi workers and CDPOs, etc. So there need to be a monitoring system, so such that every aspect of their work is being supervisioned, and a better quality is to be delivered. And there is this integrated Anganwadi programs which is based on health and nutrition, etc. A few programs are still not uh, into reach, or a few community members or the parents are still not aware of that, so they need to yet educate the public. And coming to the Anganwadi workers, they need to attend the trainings regularly, and focus on their capacity building, and improve their skills, and also reach out to the community and parents for better engagement, so that they also can help the children in learning. And coming to parents and community members, a lot more programs to be incorporated at a community level, so that they are also aware of the next steps to be taken on. So nowadays, though, as per the trends are going on, most of the people are well aware about the education part as well, and there is increased in enrollment, academic readiness, nutrition levels, and etc. But if government also takes care of a little more focus on providing better benefits, so it might reach more people. So I would like to conclude with this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rashmi, for the great presentation. Professor Vibhuti Patel, ma'am, if you have any suggestions.
I think two suggestions. Your work is very good, but Forum for Crashes and Childcare Services has demanded that Anganwadis should be providing full day services, because these 3 hours of children being there is not helping in terms of increasing work participation of women, number one. Number two, Anganwadi should not be given honorarium or treated as a voluntary worker. The state is the employer, so they should be given the adequate wages, whatever is the minimum wages of the state, and they should be treated as employees. So what are your views on these two recommendations? Yeah.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rashmi ji. Dr. Megha, you can go ahead with your presentation.
We can move to next read.
Yes, so Aditi Chaudhary ji, you can go ahead.
I shall be starting right away. So, Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah, so good evening, everyone. So this is my topic, engendering urban spaces for achieving sustainable development goals. So this is a bit about me. So I'd be summarizing the research, the research part, and I'll be focusing more on the creative aspect. So this is something that I'm working on, that lack of sustainable and planned urban development has many impacts on different genders. So there's this anecdotes that I have from college life wherein we used to stay in PGs, and there was this restaurant facing the main road, and towards the backside, all the males used to gather and they used to keep staring throughout the day. And I mean, there would be at least 4 or 5 of them always standing there, and so it was so hard to even go to our balconies. So it's more of that. And furthermore, this migrants is an issue that I've observed around me here in my hometown. Currently, I'm residing in Jammu. So they provide cheap labor, but they are kind of living in makeshift shelters, and women are the worst sufferers. So this is a bit about the a bit background about the poor accessibility and the all the issues that are governing. Sorry, the issues that are circling around this unplanned development. So this is also a brief overview. This is more solution oriented, and the major agencies that have talked about this issue. So this is all for your kind perusal, and now I'll be focusing on the creative aspect. So this is something about once we were having a house renovated. So there was a laborer, one of the laborers who came, and he was quite young. So newly married. So on the last day of the work, he requested my father if he could. I have a huge library, so he asked for his wife likes to read, so if he could have a book or two. So I promptly gave away 2 of my books, Hindi books. So it was also very strange. It was related to patriarchy and Nari Shakti. Compiled stories. So that's what I would be reciting now. A tale of two distinct worlds. As the orange yellowish glow signals the retreat of the sun for the day, I have often observed some on bicycles, some walking briskly, the migrant laborers in my so it's the women that I closely observe, following their husbands one step behind. And yes, I am reminded of her, the one I gave away my books to. I've always felt I shared more affinities with her, having to leave our homes to go to another city. But it's far from reality. Here she is in a new town, with a new life, married off before she could even realize or fathom the mechanisms of her own body, laboring to create a new world in a small cloistered room, with no outlet for smoke or ideas. I realize with pain how distinct we are. Just like some of the tallest branches of tree grow towards the sun while others are crooked and bent downwards. She had to neatly fold her dreams, store them safely inside her bosom. Does she hope they'd ever blossom? As I roam freely in my own hometown, I've often observed migrant laborers standing near the main plaza every morning, with timid women holding bags of hopes on one side, eager to find employment even if it's for a single day. I wonder if I can recognize her, the one I never knew. A fool's hope, you might remark. But readers and book lovers can connect somehow. Yes, reading is an affinity that we share. Surely, those books would have changed her worldview, remembering me, the one she never knew. Probably consuming books by now. Reading and buying books is also a privilege. I'm humbly reminded of the fact. She might be nursing an infant or breaking her back for some landlords, laying stone for a smart city project. What became of those books, I ponder? Are those pages getting soiled with the oil leaking from packed food, or crumbling under the pressure of a married life, or serving as a fuel in the hearth, reduced to ashes like her former self? A sobering fact. We are much different than I thought. but one affinity we share is the strongest of them all, and it is we both are women. So, thank you.
Such a poignant narrative, and also the intersectional vulnerabilities, and you're being sensitive and responsive to the privileges that we as middle class women have and the vulnerability that a woman has. Very, very powerful. Excellent.
Any suggestions for the research?
You should get it translated into Hindi also. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now we'll go back to Ria ji. We'll be presenting your presentation. So Priyanka ji, if you could please do that. Thank you.
Before it begins, I would like to add some introduction to it. So good evening, everyone. My name is Ria Pandey, and I am a second-year student of Economics Honors at Delhi University. And the theme that I've chosen for the research is refugee rights and humanitarian interventions, as I found it to be something that is very crucial and complex, and it involves legal, moral, and even practical aspects. And India is also one of the largest host countries for refugees in Asia, but currently it does not have any specific law or policy for their protection and assistance. So for this purpose of a creative presentation, I have decided I chose the medium of narration of a short film called Little Terrorist. So please go ahead with that video. Thank you. The audio isn't being
Right.
heard.
Priyanka, start from start. Yeah. Unmute yourself, Priyanka.
Okay, sir.
If you'll unmute, then voice will come. Starting say, yeah.
It's still not audible.
Is it still not audible? Okay, let me see. I'll stop and start sharing
Check
again.
the volume also.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just see. Yes, ma'am. See. Let me know if you hear this thing. Did you get the audio?
No,
No, not even now.
Try from another media player.
Okay. Okay.
Of refugee rights and humanitarian Indian movie that explores the theme of refugee rights and humanitarian interventions through the lens of a young boy caught between the borders of India and Pakistan. Little Terrorist is a 2004 short film directed by Ashwin Kumar. The story follows Jamal, a 10-year-old Pakistani boy who accidentally crosses the border into India while chasing his cricket ball. The film is inspired by the true story of a Pakistani boy who crossed the border into India and was sheltered by a Hindu family. In the film, Jamal's predicament highlights the challenges faced by refugees and migrants, especially children who are often subject to crossfire of political conflicts and border disputes. Despite his innocent intentions, Jamal is perceived as a threat by Indian authorities and is forced to seek refuge in a nearby village. Through Jamal's journey, the film intertwines into basic human rights, emphasizing the right to freedom of movement and the right to seek asylum. It sheds light on the importance of exercising these rights even in the face of adversity and challenges societal perceptions of refugees as terrorists, or threats to national security. As Jamal forms an unlikely bond with a Hindu villager named Bhola, the film underscores the universal values of compassion, empathy, and solidarity, transcending religious and cultural divides. Bhola's willingness to help Jamal despite the prevailing tensions between the two countries exemplifies the power of human connection and the potential for positive change in a conflict ridden region. The film shows how Jamal and Bhola share a common passion for cricket and how they bond over their humanity and compassion. The film highlights the human rights issues faced by refugees, such as the right to life, liberty, security, and protection from violence and persecution. It also challenges and opportunities of humanitarian interventions, such as the role of individuals, communities, and authorities in helping or hindering the refugees. The director Ashwin Kumar is an Indian filmmaker who is known for his independent and unconventional approach to filmmaking and his focus on social and political issues. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Little Terrorist and was also honored by the Indian government with the National Film Award. The film deals with the themes of cross border relations, conflict, and displacement between India and Pakistan. Little Terrorist differs from other works based on these themes in its short and simple format, its realistic and minimalist style, and its positive and hopeful message. The film draws on the real life incident of a 10-year-old Pakistani boy named Jamal who crossed the border while playing cricket and was returned to his family by the Indian Border Security Force in 2003. The film fictionalizes some of the details and characters of the incident and adds a humanistic and artistic touch to the story. In conclusion, Little Terrorist serves as a poignant reminder of the need for compassion and understanding in addressing the plight of refugees and migrants. By highlighting the importance of basic human rights and advocating for humanitarian interventions, the film inspires viewers to challenge stereotypes, promote empathy, and work towards creating a more inclusive and compassionate world. It is a film that deserves to be seen and discussed. Thank you. Indian movie that explores the theme of refugee. Indian.
Thank you so much for that video. And coming to the research part, I would like to highlight on the part of Pakistani refugees that are currently stationed in India. I would the some of the sections that will be included in my essay are like the overview of refugee movements in South Asia, with that history of Pakistani refuge in India. Then I will also attack the legal and policy framework that means India's approach to refugee protection, and I will also highlight one or two case studies of interventions for Pakistani refugees and the legal status and rights, or majorly the challenges faced by the Pakistani refugees, and with a hint of special focus on women. Um, and then also the gender and vulnerable groups, majorly children and women. And then I will also highlight the influence of India and Pakistan's bilateral relations on the refugee status, that is the diplomatic interventions. And then I will try to evaluate the current policies and recommend something that needs to be taken care of for refugee rights and interventions. So, ma'am, anything that you would like to suggest?
Was a girl who was physically challenged, and she was lost in Pakistan territory, and the processes that were involved. And I think Madam Sushma Swaraj personally took responsibility of bringing her back. So I think both the sides, if you show, no, then it would have give a balanced picture. And it's not a question of attacking the law. It is critically reflecting on law and suggesting what kind of amendments we can make. Because the language that you use, no, attack immediately puts you in a very problematic area. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I'll take care of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So with this, we come to an end of our presentations for today. First and foremost, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to all the participant teams who have poured their time, effort, and creativity into making this event a success. Each team brought a unique perspective, creativity, and enthusiasm to the table, enriching our experience and inspiring us all. Your hard work has truly made a difference, and we are immensely grateful for your participation. Thank you so much to all the participant teams. And thank you so much to our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, ma'am, for giving us such prompt suggestions and recommendations about how all of us can better our research. Thank you so much, ma'am. Additionally, you can also submit a blog article for IMPRI Insight blog based on your presentation. The guidelines for the same can be found on our website. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, would you have any closing chair remarks? Ma'am, you're not audible.
So in my closing remarks, I would just like to summarize that Professor Sanjukta, she also brought in some of the very important aspects of women in diplomacy, because gone are the days when women in diplomacy and policy-making bodies had to be only seen, not to be heard. Gone are the days when women in decision-making bodies tried to voice their opinion. Whenever they tried to speak, they were asked to make coffee and bring sandwiches for their male colleagues. It was on 8th March 1975, the UN Declaration of International Women's Day, that popularized the slogan, "I don't make coffee, I make policy." I think Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya also showed historically how women have made essential contributions to diplomacy and international relations when they have a seat at the table. The negotiations concerning Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the example she gave about women's contribution in peacemaking, peace building, peacekeeping in Liberia, or even in the Irish peace processes, are glorious examples of fundamental roles women have played in achieving long-lasting success. Women's equal participation and representation at all levels of decision-making are key to unlocking the transformational changes that needed to secure sustainable future. Dr. Nivedita Haran made convincing case in favor of women's engagement in evidence-based policy processes through action, through research, through data generation, and through making the policies far more substantive and targeted, and more inclusive decisions which are made, and also different voices which are there in a bottom-up approach, and the solutions that are created by interacting with the community. So I think governments function better, the corruption decreases, and peace processes improve when women in public positions have a mandated power. So without inputs of half the world's population, we cannot develop policies that work for everyone. And I think that also came out from our participants' presentation, such a serious, well-researched, sensitive, and perceptive presentations they have made, whether through their paper, that is PowerPoint presentations or films or poetry that has captured such complex topics in a extremely with gender responsiveness, and also which has a very tremendous power of words, power of imagining, and power of creative expressions that you have shown. I congratulate all the participants who have made their presentation in such a short time, like you are given only 5 minutes, but still you could put your convey your message across. That is a really excellent exercise for any person in public domain, because when you attend the international conferences for representation of whole country's problem, you get 5 minutes, okay, in the UN meeting, because there are 200 representatives, 200 countries which are sending their representatives. So this is a very good exercise of encapsulating the highlights of your research that you have put in for last 1 month. Thank you very much. And thank you now. Yes, thank you, Ruth, for conducting the session so very well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Just a little announcement. Ending gender-based violence cohort 2 will be starting on Tuesday. And if anyone present here is interested in the course, you can avail special discounted rates if you contact us soon. So please contact the IMPRI team through email for the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, yes, Pallavi ji, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, just wanted to thank and thanks for putting all this together. And I don't know, another set of workshops we'll be really looking forward to it. And I think for even more nuanced understanding, I think this thing has to go on. I mean, you've done a wonderful initiative and it definitely should not stop here.
Yeah.
And we really look forward to being a part again.
Thank
Thank you so much.
you. Thank you, Pallavi.
Thank you so much.
On 8th, no? All of us are meeting on 8th for this 8th of March, for this course. Yeah. And also remaining presentations we'll take up on that. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I have also shared the link for the course we'll be starting on Tuesday. You can go through that.
Yeah.
Okay. As we come to an end of day 9 of Young Women Leaders in Public Policy Fellowship, an online national winter school program, a 2-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship, I, Reetlath, researcher, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center. We are extremely grateful to our experts for day 9, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji, and Dr. Nivedita P. Haran ji, for taking out their valuable time and giving us an opportunity to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all the participants who gave a very creative and interesting presentations and participated in today's deliberation. Reading for the session have been shared in your email, and a video of the session will also be shared for your learning. We look forward to welcoming you for our last day of this certificate course on 8th March 2024 at 3 p.m. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a very good evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Reet.
Thank you, ma'am.